Call the January 24th, 2022 school board meeting to order. It is 7 p.m. We're in conference room C of the District Administration Building, 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley? Here. Dr. Jessup Banger?
Here.
Mr. Meyer?
Here.
Ms. Mufeld? Here. Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Rowland?
Here.
Mr. Doman?
Here. Thank you.
Will Floro?
Here.
Kate Pluto? Here.
Thank you. We will move on to public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. Board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. Board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision making. Board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, the individual board member may respond to an issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with members of the community. Because non-agenda items not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. We'll start in the room. If anyone would like to make a comment on something that is not on the agenda tonight, please come forward.
Good evening, everyone. Deb Falk-Pellick, 7435 West Wells Street. I would like to say thank you to Dr. Means for initiating an audit of special education. It's a long, long time coming. I remember when you came to the city of Wauwatosa's Disability Commission and talked about your listening sessions and saying that this has been a common theme you heard in the 14, 17, however many sessions you did, and people wanting to be heard, listened to, and recognized. Last week when you came to the PTA council meeting, the council, of course, is made up of representation from all of our schools. You used the word antiquated to talk about some of our practices within special education. We certainly have very good things going on in this district. We have very good people, but there's work to be done. There's a difference between listening and hearing, and Dr. Means, thank you for doing both.
Anyone else from in the room who would like to make a comment on non-agenda items? If you're online and you'd like to make a comment on non-agenda, please raise your hand. Virtually. Jamie, I don't see anyone else in the room. Do we have anyone online?
No, there are no hands raised.
All right. Move on to our next item. Mr. Rowe.
All right, approval of board meeting minutes from the regular meeting of January 10th, 2022 and virtual executive closed session of January 20, 2022. And I said,
Second.
Thank you. Any board discussion on the meeting minutes? Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley? Yes. Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld? Yes. Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
yes.
Mr. Doman?
Yes. Moving on to our next item, recognition. The board would like to recognize the West Allis Knights of Columbus, who made a generous donation of $5,000 to help our special education students. I believe we have a couple representatives. If you want to come forward, please say a few words. We'd be happy to hear from you. Thank you so much for the donation. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you very much. My name is Rich Harris, B-E-R-E-S. I'm the Grand Knight of the West Allis Knights of Columbus. And actually, we would like to thank you for the opportunity to help the students. Knights of Columbus themselves believe in life. We are pro-life. That only doesn't mean just the unborn children. It means everyone and a betterment of life for everyone. This was a very easy thing for us to do. Peggy Weiler, who runs the program, is the daughter of one of our members and the granddaughter of one of our members. One of our members has a granddaughter that's in the program. So we are very thankful that we found a need that we could help. And if there's a chance for us to do something, in the future, please don't be afraid to ask. So thank you.
Any board comments? That's right.
I just want to say a huge thank you. There are so many organizations within our community, nonprofits, volunteer groups, et cetera. And over the course of my time on the board, I've seen more and more donations and involvement, and it just goes so much further than you can even imagine. I'm really glad that you all have that really personal connection to be able to hear and see how students experience that type of, significant donation, quite honestly. So thank you for Knights of Columbus, thank you for the BLW, thank you for all of the organizations that donate to our scholarship funds or donate instruments or come volunteer at, events and whatnot. It really is what makes Wauwatosa special. And I think the last 2 years have been really difficult with, not having that ability to be in physical community with one another. And so these types of things just go much further than you might imagine. So thank you, truly.
Any other board comments? All right, move on to human resources, personal consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve as presented. Second.
We have a motion and second. Any discussion from the board? Community comment on the personal consent agenda. Let's start with folks in the room. You want to come forward? State your name and address. You have 3 minutes.
Joseph McLuke, 772 North 116th Street. I'm requesting that a member of the board request a removal of the item related to Kristen Bowers, Associate Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, from the consent agenda so that there may be additional discussion on this matter. The families of Washington School District, as well as Washington taxpayers, should be aware of the circumstances leading up to her resignation. And I would request that this item be removed so that session can be had. Thank you.
Anyone else from in the room that would like to speak on the consent agenda items? Seeing none, Jamie, is there anyone online?
Yes, we have one hand raised. Mary Jo Randall, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Mary Jo Randall, 727 North 59th Street. Today I sent this email to each one of you on the board asking, has the board voted on or will you be voting on an agreement, settlement, or any written covenant that provides financial benefits in any form, for example, cash, employee benefits, salary, etc., related to Kristen Bowers' resignation? Thank you. No one responded, either yes or no. Ms. Bowers is a local public official, and as such, the terms of her resignation agreement are public. Whether or not you disclose them tonight, they will be obtained through public records. I'm asking again for a yes or no answer. If you are choosing to vote tonight and including some type of financial package, settlement, whatever you would like to call it, and are not sharing that with the public, then you are covering up expenditures. Also on the topic of my emails not being responded to on a pretty regular basis, I understand that the city council has a process by which emails that are sent to them can be attached to meeting agendas. I would urge you to look into that process and consider that. Thank you.
Anyone else online, Jamie?
There are no more hands raised.
All right, we'll close public comment on that item. Assuming please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley? Yes. Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld? Yes. Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Doman?
Yes. Human Resources Action Item, Dr. Jessica.
It is recommended the board approve a 25% increase in the colleague substitute rates.
Second.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jennifer Foch, the Director of Human Resources here in the district. We are proposing a 25% increase to the colleague subbing rate. So this is for our current teaching staff who either substitute and lose some of their prep time or combine classes to cover for their colleagues. As we all know, we've been faced with a shortage of substitutes, and we have felt that more recently than at any other point this year. While things are trending up in a positive direction right now with our fill rate, we do need to honor the work our colleagues are doing, our teaching staff and covering. And we know that it's stressful, and we appreciate what they're doing, and this would be a way to honor them. This rate also has been in effect for some time and hasn't really moved. So it's a good time to review it as well.
Only thing I would add is that I want to thank Ms. Foch and Roger Dixon for doing the costing. It was one of those issues where we collectively wanted to recognize staff, but we needed to also do the costing and make sure that we had the funds to recognize staff. We were able to get through the first few months, or first few weeks, I should say, of the month of January during this Omicron spike as a result of staff stepping up and sacrificing their prep time to fill in for their colleagues. And so, as I've indicated in video messages, I want to say thank you again. When we look at our colleague rate pay, it's just one of those, I think we talked about it at our last meeting. How do we say thank you and make this a destination district? It's just not the salary alone, it's how you recognize employees. And this is another attempt at our way of saying thank you to our staff.
Thank you, Dr. Means. I would echo that. Say thank you to all of our staff that have stepped up and used their free time and their tough time to cover classes and then put our students first. We have an amazing staff, and it's greatly appreciated. This is certainly one token of that, and continue to do more to help our teachers and help our staff. Any board comments, questions? Dr. Dixon?
In talking to several staff this weekend, when they knew about this, they were happy. When I was sharing this, they were appreciative. So echoing Mr. Gilman's thoughts, big thank you to the staff who have had a really heavy lift, certainly over the last year and a half, but this year in particular. Last month has been very hard. Also, I really appreciate the continued level of increases in detail and provide background, comparative districts, the budget analysis. You're answering many of the questions that as a board member I have well in advance of me even asking. So thank you for participating and providing a breadth of understanding.
Any other board questions or comments? Any community comment on this item? Let's start with those in the room or online and want something. Who's want to speak? Please raise your hand. Yeah, I don't see anyone in the room. Is there anyone online?
No, there are no hands raised.
Thank you.
I'm sure our board representatives, our student board representatives can attest to the fact that you've seen other teachers subbing for you over the last few weeks, correct?
We have, and I would just say that students really do value teachers who do take their prep time to sub. I have 2 study halls, fortunately, and I can't imagine doing just my normal schoolwork without them, rather than doing everything that a teacher does without their prep time. And talking to my Algebra 2 teacher, who I'm fairly close with, I would say, she really, really, really appreciates just this, as it does show that we value our teachers. I think the more we can do in that respect right now is for the better.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Newbrow,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowley,
Yes.
Mr. Dillon.
Yes. Move on to the business services report, the monthly financial report for December 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Dolman. And I know that our business consultant, Mr. Dixon, is trying to get his microphone working. I don't know if Mr. Jamie Price was able to get that to work or not, but this is a project that I've wanted to fix and work on for the board since arriving. This is the beta version of it. I would welcome feedback from the board on this report, but it's in the name of transparency for not only the board, but also the community. Gives you a little bit more detail on where we are from a financial standpoint. It gives you a summary of where things are. Dr. Just Anger, I know you've asked multiple times. We will have on our board, and also Leanne, you have asked as well. So I don't want to forget anyone here. But in February, we will give you a comprehensive review on where we are with our Essa Funds. I think we're in a good position, in a good place with our Essa Funds. This report gives you a preview that we're positioned well in that arena. So I don't know, Jamie, if Mr. Dixon's available to weigh in or if his microphone's working or not yet.
Yeah, I see him in the attendee list and I've promoted him to panelist, but he keeps dropping back out to attendee. Oh, no, he's just coming. He should be coming online any second.
I know there was
This is Roger.
Roger's online now.
Okay, great. And the last thing I wanted to do is just give the board some information on expenditures over the $20,000 mark, because we've had a lot of conversations about that dollar amount. And I know that there's at least one question about one expenditure that I need to get some more information on. That's with a local restaurant, and that dollar amount, I think the dollar amount's around for $23,501. We'll get that information for you and present it to you as soon as possible. Mr. Dixon, do you have any other information you would like to share or overview?
I think I do want to point out a couple of things about the vendor reports, vendors over 20,000. In many of those cases, for example, Amazon, and I do believe for refs, that could be a number of different individual invoices that were paid during the month or that we received during the month. So the intent is to show the total paid to a single vendor. It may be for multiple items or multiple events. As is the case, I believe, with both of those, that we will get a defined answer back to the board members probably tomorrow or Wednesday. Yes.
And so, Dr. Means, if I'm understanding correctly, this is in response to all of our requests for more regular updates financially. And will this be the form that the report takes each month?
Yes.
Or, okay, so it'll, as different things come up, it'll just fit in different sections.
Yes, ma'am.
Will there be a process through which we submit questions or responses to this, or Mr. Phillips, will you look at this first? It seems that you're our primary guy. Like sort of like what's going to be the order of operations? Because I think something that we've been trying to figure out, not just for finance, but for HR and retention, like for different departments, us seeing a more regular sort of update to be more proactive. So, and you don't have to answer now, but like it would just be helpful for us to know the process so that you're not getting last minute requests, that kind of thing.
We plan to present this report to you at the second meeting of every month. So that will, from a process standpoint, that'll be the time in which we will present it for the previous month. So in February, on the 28th of February, we will present this information for the month of January. So that's our order of operations that we plan to do. If you have questions regarding financial issues, we will try to put that in the summary so we can provide that for you, but more importantly to the community as the transparency is really important.
Thank you.
So there won't be
Hello, may I speak?
It's a report, so there's no need for us to vote on it. It's more of it's a discussion point, a report for you to discuss and to ask for more information as we go.
We'll go to Dr. Joseph Banger, and then I heard Mr. Meyer outline. We'll go to you next.
Can you, Dr. Means, share a little bit more about the CARES Act funding and what, there's a lot of different funding streams that have occurred over the last year and a half, but just to be really clear for myself, which strand is
The CARES Act.
so there was a $793,000 CARES Act that popped into the budget at some point, and it was it came up because there was an explanation of the material variance that we had in addition. There was, $800,000 will get attention, and so I just wanted to kind of check with you because I know we've had questions about when's the ESSER funds coming, the governor's funding, and some of these is now starting to.
There's really three different funding streams that we're receiving. So the first funding stream is the ESSER funds. We have $1 million remaining in ESSER 2, and we have approximately $3.1 million in ESSER 3 funds. When you look at some of the set-asides that we have to put aside for ESSER, we have a little over $4 million in ESSER funds available. So that's one funding stream. The second is the dollar amount that the governor used for emergency rescue funds that the state received. He redirected that money to public schools to close the shortfall for public education in the 11th hour of the budget last summer. That's approximately $750,000 that the district will receive, and we finally received that funding source. So that's another dollar amount that we're receiving. Roger, if you can assist me with the CARES, because I don't have a lot of information, Dr. Joseph Banger, on the CARES funding source. I would have to do more research on that. But Roger, if you have information on it.
The CARES money is the money that the governor was able
to
that's the CARES allocate. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the third form of money is a grant that was awarded to us by FEMA. Again, it's all the coronavirus stimulus, but we're going to be getting about $485,000.
I think that's the third funding source I'm thinking of, Eric. So there's FEMA funds that we're receiving. It's a little over $400,000 that we're receiving in terms of FEMA funds. So when you combine the governor's dollar amount that we need to use to close our budget shortfall that we received from the lack of funding from the budget, the ESSER funds of nearly $4 million and the FEMA dollars, we have enough money, I like to say, to put together a plan to address the learning loss and the social emotional impact that has inflicted our school district with staff and students. And so that plan of what we can do to address the learning loss, but also the social emotional challenges that we've seen in the classroom in our schools is something that I would like to discuss with the board and the public in the next few months. I think it's significant. We've discussed it informally, but I think it's time to put a plan together.
Mr. Meyer, you had a question on that?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. That first, I want to commend your approach for combining separate expenditures under each vendor to determine the $20,000 threshold. I really commend you for that, the spirit of doing that, and that so people know that these are not necessarily individual expenditures over that amount that would perhaps trigger a board vote under policy. because sometimes you get in this, well, is it one invoice or two, and so it just avoids all those questions about whether, we're really telling what's going on. So this is a sincere attempt to really tell what's going on. The first thing I'd request is that, I really think this is a wonderful thing for us to do. And I would like this vendor payments report to stand on its own. If a member of the community for the first time attended a board meeting or looked at an agenda, that they could see from the face of this vendor payments report exactly what this is, so that they know. And now I could ask you tonight, well, what's Demco Incorporated? I mean, and we're writing all these checks. Who are they? Well, once you answer my question, now I'm going to know, and I might not feel the need to ever again ask. But I would like the community member who just decides to take an interest in school district operations to be able to understand a little bit more from this report what not just the vendor name, but what's the type of thing we're buying from this vendor. And I don't mean get into all kinds of detail, but just tell me what this is, what kind of thing this is that we're buying from this vendor. And then the second request is that as we progress with that we have a year-to-date total so that we can start to see, well, legal services, how much are we spending a year on legal services? And then we could start to ask the question, well, do we ever hit a point where we can be more economical, not to do all legal services in-house, but is there anything where, we'd spend less money actually having a staff attorney, like the city has a staff attorney. And certainly there's always going to be some things where we wouldn't, even if we decided to have a staff attorney, there are always going to be things where we would need outside counsel. And I'm not saying necessarily it's a good idea to have a staff attorney for the school district. But if we were to put a year-to-date total on here, we could all start to see whether that's a question we need to start considering for how we manage our money. So, again, thank you very much for this report. Thank you.
Since you're writing things down there, Dr. Means. So the other thing that would be really helpful for me to see, and I don't know if other board members would like this as well, so if it's just me, don't worry about it. But one of the things I really appreciated about the referendum budget is we were able to see by school, like literally, how did we end up at that number? As we think about the Essa Funds, as we think about the CARES funds, we think about, the FEMA funds, where that money's going, because I think it looks like a lot of money, but there are a lot of strings attached to a lot of that money. And so ideally, I'd like us to be able to show, even if it's just like on the side, like here's what we got and here's what we're spending it on and why, to be able to show that we're in alignment with the government requirements. And to your point, to be able to show that, yes, we got that money from the governor, but that's not money that we can use. That is literally covering the budget shortfall because we were not fully funded by the state. So that money, it's almost like it's in and out. We never saw it. So I think to be able to paint that picture of where that money's going is going to be helpful. Just so it doesn't get lost in all of this. Although with different line items.
Any other board questions or comments on the report for Dr. Means? Or just add a thank you for putting this together. This is another example of one changes we've asked you to make, and you've heard us, and you're bringing these things forward. So look forward to continuing to work on this and get it to a great place. And
Kudos to Roger Dixon.
Mr. Dixon, thank you for your work. Thank you, my colleagues, for great feedback. We'll move on to business services action item. Ms. Mead.
Yes, thank you. It is recommended that the school board approve the 457 sub B deferred compensation plan as presented at the January 10th, 2022 meeting, and I so move.
there a second?
Second.
Any board questions or comments on this item that previously discussed?
Currently at 30 staff members who are utilizing the plan right now. I know there was a question from the public. I haven't had a chance to connect with that citizen as to why the district hasn't explored other methods or opportunities to maybe join the state plan or other cost-effective plans. I'm really looking forward to having those conversations and maybe even exploring those discussions going forward. I think one of the things that have resonated with us is that we need to continue to explore ways to make our total compensation package for staff appealing. And providing a 457B deferred compensation plan is nice, but if there are other things we can do and make those things cost effective, Scotch and Mr. Gibson and I will continue to those opportunities.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Any other board comments or questions? Any comment on this item? Start with anyone in the room. If you're online, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak to this item. See no one in the room. Is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Braley?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Newfeld?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes. And so we want to TGMR action item. To approve the non-resident space ability for the 2022-2023 school year.
It is recommended that the school board approve the following space available for the 2022-2023 school year for Chapter 220 and open enrollment. Space available for Chapter 220. There are no seats available for new students through the Chapter 220 program. Space available for open enrollment applicants. There are no seats available for new students through the open enrollment program at this time. It is recommended that the district maintain a waiting list for open enrolled students. The district will determine if any seats are available in August 2022, and I so move.
Second. Thank you. Dr. Means, I know we have quite a few people probably watching tonight that was prepared the discussion. The first meeting, we just want to talk a little bit about kind of our process and why we're at recommending the space available.
The formula that we use is based on the second Friday count in January. Based on our second Friday count in January, we currently do not have any seats available. We utilize our resident seats and resident students, and we roll those students up to the next year. So based on our current formula, we do not have seats available. But typically what happens is that during the summer months, we have a lot of movement of resident families who either move out of the community or they make other school decisions. That then creates the potential of creating open enrollment seats, hence the recommendation of creating a waiting list for open enrollment students. If the seats become available through a waiting list for open enrollment students in the summer, the Student Services Department will call those families in the corresponding grade levels where there are seats. It's important to note that we do not take non-resident students in open enrollment that will then cause a higher class size for resident students. I want to be very clear about that process. So that's how we determine if we can take open enrollment students. It's based on the availability and if we have space in certain grade levels in certain schools.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan. Any board questions or comments on this item that we discussed earlier? Seeing none, we'll go to community comments on this item. We'll start with anyone in the room. Seeing none, Jamie, is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Braley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Newfeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes. Move on to superintendent action items. We'll start with COVID-19 mitigation protocol recommendations. Dr. Jessica.
It is recommended that the school board approve the recommendations, and I so move.
Seven. Thank you. Dr. Newman?
Yes, thank you. This, my recommendation is even that the board consider the following recommendations for our COVID-19 mitigation. And before I get into the recommendations, I just want to share that as the community knows and the board knows, since arriving back from winter break, we've seen a spike in COVID-19 positive cases as a result of the Omicron variant. That has put a number of different stressors on our school system. And as I've weighed the different challenges, it's really become imperative, I believe, to bring forth to you some modifications. I think there's also a really important point that I want to share with you this evening, and that is I believe, moved to a point in the pandemic where, from a school perspective, a school operations perspective, we have to weigh the challenge of school operations as heavily as we weigh the challenge of making sure that we are ensuring that the medical safety of students is adhered to. That's clearly our charge, and we want to make sure that that's happening. But that cannot overshadow, I believe, our what we do in education. And I think there were times during the last few weeks where our infrastructure was so weak that it overran what we were trying to do from an educational standpoint. We had our assistant principal actually doing contact tracing and not overseeing discipline and instruction in our schools. And so that became, I believe, a challenge for us. So this evening, I'm asking the board to consider the following changes in our protocol. One, that the school system, the school district would provide written notification of an in-school COVID-19 exposure and advise the individual or their parent or guardian to monitor symptoms. The school district will not require quarantine for in-school exposures, and any exposed individual will be allowed to attend school or work. That's a change in what we currently do. Number two, follow the most recent CDC guidelines regarding isolation and outside school exposures. The COVID positive individual is recommended to provide a negative COVID-19 test upon their return to school or work. Three, once a school infection rate reaches level 2 or level 1, proceed with the strongly encouraged masking protocol in that school as the Board of Education approved December 13th. That component or third point, I just want to be sure that you've already passed that. That's already in effect. The only reason why we haven't implemented it is because we haven't reached a level 2 or a level 1. Point number 4, per CDC guidelines, when masking is not required, all COVID positive individuals or those quarantined may return to school or work after quarantining or isolating for 5 days if the individual wears a mask for the following 5 days. Alternatively, the individual may complete a full 10-day quarantine and return on day 11 without a mask required. So those are the recommendations based on the CDC guidelines right now. This would, at the core, move our quarantine duration period from 10 days to 5 days. And that has been, I believe, something that we were not nimble enough to change right away. I feel terrible that we were unable to make that change for families. But the way that we're currently proceeding, we needed to bring this to the Board of Education. So another recommendation that I would bring to you is that we try to move in a point where the board allows administration to make additional modifications in consultation with our nursing team and the medical advisory committee, in alignment with policy 8450, where we are able to manage COVID-19 like any other disease that we face as a school system. So that's something else that I believe that we need to have the flexibility for. The number of emails and concerns that I received, especially from our high school families, on the edge of final exams, where we were still in the mode of having 10-day quarantining, and I was unable to move into a 5-day quarantine. Was difficult to tell them I can't do anything else, knowing that we had that policy there. So those are the recommendations. I think many of them are in alignment with CDC guidelines. It allows us to be somewhat nimble, but also the recommendation is to start moving in a direction where we're more in alignment with ongoing modifications with policy 8450 that allows us to keep the board and the community updated on the changes, but to make that pivot as quickly as possible. I think families they were frustrated and didn't understand why we were unable to meet their needs. And what I would conclude by saying is we're nearly 2 years into dealing with COVID, and schools in some case, especially Tulsa, we're still handling it the way we did in March and April of 2020. And we have to continue to pivot. As the variants come, we have to be more and more nimble. And if there were a lot there, I try to listen to all sides and all perspectives. One of the main messages that I heard from all sides is that we have to be more fluid in our response as a school system when we see a need, and reducing that quarantine time and doing other things would have helped a lot of students if we would have had that flexibility. So,
thank you, Dr. Means. Just a point of clarification, is your recommendation that we're going in tonight that we would move it to our COVID-19 response to policy 8450, or are you saying that would be the future? And it is something I support, but I just want to understand and make sure it's clear.
I would like to bring that back for another night. I think we have a lot other things to discuss tonight. I don't want to cloud that up with what we need to do tonight. But ideally, I would like long term, how we handle COVID, I would like to align it to COVID.
Thank you. Just thought that was important. We're going to open up to the board for any comments or questions.
I just have a question about the first point on the new amendments. So when it says the district will provide written notification of an in-school COVID-19 exposure, how would that work for high school students who are in 7 classes a day? So previously it was within 6 feet or 15 minutes. Has that changed or is it the same?
We had that discussion, and it would be a little more complicated with high school students. But it would
So this is going back to the masking question. I was not at the December meeting and I watched it, but I did have a question specific to junior kindergarten. So all of our decision-making has been around the ability for families to have made the decision to vaccinate or not vaccinate. And our junior kindergartners, parents have not had that opportunity. So what are we doing specifically for JK to make sure that we are staying in alignment with the decisions that we've made for other grades and that we're not disadvantaging that grade while still not holding the rest of the school back for, you know, a very small percentage of the school. I just want to make sure that we're being consistent and equitable in the decisions that we're making.
At this time, we have not differentiated junior kindergarten from the rest of the families. I think for some families who have junior kindergarten students, some will feel strongly that they want that option, and some will feel strongly that they don't want the option. I think where we land as a school system is that we have articulated that we believe that part of the logic behind providing the options that those students have the ability to vaccinate. I don't have a good answer, Leanne, in terms of how we should handle junior kindergarten, because I think it gets into then making a universal decision for a group of students. I can see both sides. If you're asking me,
I am.
if you're asking me, I would probably lean towards making it universal masking because those students do not have the ability to vaccinate.
So universal masking for just junior kindergarten.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a hard question to answer.
There will be a time for public comments. Now, for discussion. We'll be happy to move forward to hearing from you. But please, have the conversation. Thank you.
Strong. Thank you. So it's been quite a ride. 2 years have been 2 years. It has felt like 2
decades.
It's silly. I'll just get right to it. My feeling of where we are now is obviously much different than where I felt 2 years ago, a year ago, a couple months ago, a couple weeks ago. And look, because now we have significant data. There's research, our own data, and I guess what's concerning to me in our data is that the amount of quarantines, especially in the last few weeks, has been significant. Right, the positivity rate within the schools has been hovering around 1 to 3%, sometimes up to 5%. But the quarantine rates in the schools have been 10, 20, 30, 40% of the schools' kids having quarantine because of the guidelines and the policies we set up. So I think that's the data. It's not me thinking it. The data says that 3% of the kids, let's say, were positive, but we were quarantining 20, 30, 40%. So to me, that's evidence that we are casting too wide of a net and that there are too many kids who are ultimately not getting COVID, who are being caught up in that quarantine and having to be at home. And that's disruptive to families. And I think, to me, we should be as precise as possible. So that's what the right governance thing is to do, is to be as precise as possible with the kids who are quarantining at home. I think we've all been saying in-person class is the best model, the most impactful model of learning. So if we're going to be quarantining kids, we need to be really, really, really precise with who we are quarantining at home. To me, it makes sense, obviously, to quarantine kids who are COVID positive at home. Absolutely. But to me, when we cast a wider net than that, it captures too many kids in the net, and they are stuck at home. Parents have to shuffle around their schedules, maybe miss work, take vacation time. There's only a certain amount of times you can do that. It's just disruptive. And then what's you have to weigh all of that disruption with benefit. And what we've seen again in the data is that in Milwaukee County, there was one child who passed away with COVID. Maybe not because of COVID, maybe we just, that's not publicly available. But that happened one time. It was in the city of Milwaukee. There is no suburban kid who passed away from COVID. I'm just gonna give cold facts because it's school talk. We can also talk about the emotional piece of what I'm saying. The data says that hasn't happened. I think as much as we all feared that it might in the beginning, right? But I think as a school board, we did not want to be part of that story. We did not want to be that. And that hasn't happened. In terms of hospitalizations, those have been, I believe there were 4 students from Wauwatosa who were hospitalized with COVID. I think it's important to note that hospitals don't differentiate hospitalizations with COVID or because of COVID. They are just testing every kid who comes in there with every hospital-related ailment. And we don't know if that was because of COVID or if it was just they busted their leg and they also happen to have COVID or got COVID while they're in the hospital. That's just how it is. I don't know if it was because of COVID or not. So there were 4, right? So and we had, I think in our data, it shows that we have, I think 1,000 students, if I remember that correctly, it's a little bit north of 1,000, who have tested positive for COVID-19 already. We have about 7,000 students, so about 1 in 7 students have already tested positive for COVID-19 that we know of, that had significant enough symptoms that they took the test. They had testing available, and I think it's probably significantly more than that. Just given testing availability, I think that's a leap that we can put together. That more than 1,000 kids have already tested positive. So that's sort of one side. Is that I think that the risk is lower with Omicron. We're catching too many kids in this quarantine net. And that's a problem that I think we need to solve. That's number 1. Number 2, on the 5-day return. What is also true is that I think there was a study that came out this week that said 1 in 7 people is still contagious with COVID after 5 days. And that the 5-day CDC recommendation, is something that they agreed to, that is acceptable enough risk for America, right, to contain. But I think it is worth us having a conversation of, is that risk worth it to us? If 1 in 7, I forget if it's 15 or 17% of students after day 5 of being positive, continue to be positive, and we're creating an environment where there will not necessarily be universal masking happening. And there's definitely not universal masking happening at lunch. If 1 in 7 of those kids come to school, to me, that creates a situation where we're going to get all sorts of kids catching COVID. So on one side, I want to change the way we're quarantining. On the other side, I want to have more clarity that the kids who are coming back after 5 days are actually not contagious with COVID. Let's, keep the kids who don't have COVID in the school keep the kids who do have COVID out of the school. It comes down to that. So that is what an amendment I put together provides what it says, and I can read it if it's helpful. But it just basically tweaks mostly those 2 points. That we will not quarantine close contacts inside or outside of the school because of the small amount of students who were actually COVID positive that we caught in that net. The benefit of that is not worth having the hundreds and hundreds of kids who were not ultimately COVID positive also be caught in that net and the disruption that causes the community. That's number one. It also asks for if you're COVID positive, after 5 days, you can come back if you have an antigen test that shows that you're no longer positive. Because again, there's a study that was done this week that said 1 out of 7 kids, 1 out of 7 people, is still COVID positive after 5 days. So I do think that there should be some higher level of proof that shows you're coming back, it's going to be okay, and we're not creating more chaos in the school building. So that's what this amendment seeks to do. I'm happy to take any questions. It doesn't have a second yet, but
Yeah, so are you making an amendment?
I will
for both
move the amendment.
For both items?
Yes.
Is there a second?
A second.
So now, you can now discuss the amendment. Mr. Bodie, Mr. Ryan.
Sean, in a conversation I had with a physician at MCW this weekend, and I'm going to assume did not see that study. I have not seen it. Was kind of did not strongly believe that testing was likely easily obtained or was not essential in this. And I've been kind of grappling with that since I had that conversation, because I'm not in a different place than you are. If a student, every student who's not positive, we want to. I'll say for me, every student who's not currently COVID positive, I want to school. So that's the only thing I'm grappling with, kind of in your amendment, is the testing essential? I think the masking from day 6 to 10 is essential. So that's the question. I'm not advocating one way or the other. It's just something you can grapple with. The other thing I would say is, I'll say I've got 1 or 2 few other amendments involving JK. And the other thing I would like to say about this is, I had a couple of staff members who really strongly advocated that staff, that the default is staff are back earlier than 10 days. So that there be at 5 days, staff are encouraged or requested to test so that staff can come back as quickly as possible. And part of that was the staff members I talked to kind of the belief of, oh, there's a lot to cover here. Between subs and everything else, that we want to do everything we can to encourage and support staff. If you're sick, be home, rest, recover. And if you're not sick anymore, if symptoms have dissipated, to test, because we want you back as soon as possible. So whatever kind of support we can do for that, ease of testing, let's make sure that we've got all those things in place to every staff member's back. Because they're a component to this too, though not as obvious as the school is. So the one question I have about this, Sean, is the rapid antigen test is a requirement. And we'd love to hear colleagues' additional thoughts.
Yeah, 2. So right now we're just discussing it. We'll
Yes.
come back to the full.
Yeah, so I think my concern, like, I hear your concern, John, like, the quarantine thing has to be fixed, we've got to get these kids back in school. And I hear you in the 1 in 7, and similar to Dr. Jessup Anger, I worry about like what those 1 in 7 kids will have to do in order to get the test, like, is again, the response going to be significant enough in terms of what it takes to get them back in, that it's gonna play out in a positive way. And so I'm looking back at some of the medical advisory board folks who responded, talking about, being okay with the 5-day isolation period. And obviously, for me, it's, they have to mask days 6 through 10, like no ifs, ands, buts about it. But I'd like them back in school. I don't know, 1 in 7, it feels high, and then at the same time, I'm like, what's that going to mean in terms of actual operations? And I'm struggling because I don't want sick kids in school. And so I'd like to think we can trust families that if your kid still has symptoms on day 5, they stay home. I'm one of those parents where if my kid throws up, they don't go to school the next day, even if they feel and look totally fine and have no fever. You throw up in the last 24 hours, I'm not sending you to school. So I'm feeling like we also just have to trust folks to be the best versions of, who we're hoping they are. And that if your kid has any symptoms, that they're not going back to school. I don't know, I'm trying to lean into my compassionate self right now in terms of hoping that people will do what's best, not just for their child, their family, but for the community as well.
One other comment that I read in the folks I was talking to was the general sense at this moment, COVID is so high. You're going to be walking past multiple people every day that have it. So for me, that was great. It was just the inevitability right now of the higher spread. I don't know what it is, but just the complicated nature.
Sure. So this is where I struggled with the have to mask days 6 through 10, is that the accountability for that falls to the staff, I would say, right? And in a classroom where you've got, I'm thinking of a middle school teacher or a high school teacher that has 7 classes, right? And we're asking that teacher now to say, okay, here is your list of the kids who are on days 6 through 10. You got to make sure that they wear that mask because they are just coming off of COVID positivity. There's a 7 chance that kid might still have COVID, but now it's just on your plate to make sure that that kid still wears a mask in an environment where maybe not every kid is wearing a mask. So you've got some kids wearing a mask, some kids not. But the teacher now is asked to keep track of who needs to wear a mask if they're just coming off of that positivity. To me, I was looking for a different solution. That takes that burden off of the classroom teacher and puts it onto us to say, okay, if you want to come back after shorter than 10 days after 5, then find that antigen rapid test, not a PCR test that takes days. Go find that rapid antigen test that you can get at different places for in a shorter amount of time. And then bring that to school and you're back in it. If you're not positive, if you are positive, then you're still positive. You shouldn't be coming into the school because kids who are positive with COVID shouldn't come to school. Kids who are negative should come back in. I was looking for some other way for it to not land on the teacher's shoulders. They, have already way too much.
Yeah, I know.
Operationally, Dr. Means, speak to, was that the intent that teachers would list every day of here's kids who wears a mask with, or was it the idea that's left up to students and families to hear? We were hoping that families would hear the calls. So we wouldn't be asking. I'm not sure that makes you feel like that, Mr. Rowland, right? It's not that, but
All right.
no,
Yeah.
rather than make sure
Yeah.
understood. I just wanted to clarify what we were asking. Other board comments, questions on Mr. Rowland's amendment?
Yes, a lot of words have been said. So for clarity for me and for the community, please will you read the motion to amend again?
Yeah, I can read it. Okay. So I'll just read that. The school district shall provide written notification of an in-school COVID-19 exposure to advise the individual and their parents and guardian to monitor for symptoms. The Wauwatosa School District will not require quarantine for exposures, and any exposed individual will be allowed to attend school or work. Students exposed to COVID-19 may also choose to quarantine at home if that is preferred. These students will be able to participate in remote virtual learning if that's their preference. A COVID positive individual must quarantine for 5 days after testing positive. Students seeking to return after 5 days are required to provide a negative rapid antigen COVID-19 test upon their return to school or work. Students who continue to test positive after the 5-day quarantine period may not return to school unless they test negative, which should, or 10 days have elapsed, which probably make that clearer, I guess. If that's a friendly amendment to the amendments. We'll see if it's passed. Alternative, we're not going to keep them out. Alternatively, the individual may complete a full 10-day quarantine and return on day 11 without a mask required, when masking is not required. Staff members will also have this option. Once a school's internal infection rate reaches level 2 or level 0.051 to 1%, or level 1, which is less than 0.05%, proceed with the strongly encouraged masking protocol in that school as the Board of Education approved on December 13, 2021.
Mr. Meyer, does that come through?
So, actually, no, because it's a very complex motion. And if we're going to present such a complex motion, it should be in writing. Because you go through a lot of words here and a lot of lines and a lot of paragraphs. And it's not clear to me exactly what the distinction is. I start to think it's not responsible to tinker like this orally without actually having something in writing.
Just a point of clarification. We have written copies at the meeting, and I shot you an email with it. I know it's in the meeting, so
okay. Well,
that would have happened before the meeting. I didn't know that you were going to know here, so otherwise I would have emailed you before.
Well, now I'll go into, does the listening community know this is a very complex motion, and I'm not sure everybody, now we're going to ask for public comment, and I'm not sure everybody knows what the motion is. Okay, I'm going to open my email now and look at this again. And it's quite an extensive set of changes.
Speak, Phil.
Thank you. I will not be supporting the amendment. I do want to talk more about the main, some main concerns that I have with the recommendations. But I do think that changing it in this manner takes out for me some key elements that we need to keep in, like the CDC recommendations, because obviously those are some things that we were following, we need to follow. There are a couple of other points, but it is a detailed amendment. I appreciate the work that you put into it. I just can't support it, given the complexity of it.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. Any other questions or comments on the amendment before we vote on the amendment?
Yeah, I'll make one more comment if I may. Now, looking at this in writing, there's like 20 lines changed. This is like so extensive that it's basically changing. It's not an amendment to the motion. It's a new motion. And I don't think anybody's had time in the community to actually know what you're proposing we do. I can't even say it's bad or good. I'm saying this is too much to change on the fly without people being noticed about what exactly we're doing. So I will oppose the amendment.
Any other board comments on the amendment before we vote?
Just as one clarification, I guess, would it be easier to take each piece of one at a time? I guess would that be, one is going to take more time, but that's okay. Would that be easier or better rather than eating the apple in one bite, taking small bites and working our way through it? Take more time, but do it that way too. I just throw it out there as another alternative. I guess we could also just see if it's passed.
And then you can introduce it.
I'm not in favor of that approach.
Ms. Minnie, can you please call roll relative to Mr. Rollins?
Ms. Fraley,
No.
Dr. Jessica Banger,
No.
Mr. Meyer,
No.
Ms. Newfeld,
No.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Doman.
No. We're back to our original proposal. Ms. Newfeld, I know you said you had some questions. Happy to go back to you.
Yes, I do. I have a question for the team, the staff team. Part of this recommendation talks about the communicable disease portion of it and how we want to streamline it. It's just, what's bothering me is COVID is not like the other communicable diseases. It's also not a cold and it's not a flu. It's it's more transmissible, but it's also not as, it's not the same as the communicable diseases we are thinking of in our policies, like measles and mumps, and we just don't have a large amount of illness because we have herd immunity and we have vaccine, high amounts of, and we have mandatory vaccinations for school-age children and those other parameters. So that's one thing that's bothering me, and I'm not sure if the medical advisory panel has discussed that nuance. I completely understand some of the operational challenges. One other thing that's bothering me tonight is what Ms. Fraley brought up about junior kindergarten. To me, that is a big missing. It's missing. And I don't know what I should do with this motion tonight, honestly. I almost feel like we should vote it down and bring it back or table it or something, because I think you do have, maybe you want to bring it back, Dr. Means, and the team, and work on it a little bit more to make sure we're capturing all the considerations. Although I don't want to drag it out either, if we really think these few operational changes and pieces will help us. So I'm a little stuck. Can you help me?
And just to clarify, this isn't the original.
No, I realize that. No, I was referring to the original. I know I was looking at the piece of paper, so I didn't. I know what the original recommendation says.
So COVID is categorized as a category 1 communicable disease, which per state statute does require quarantines and isolation for anybody who's unvaccinated. It isn't like other category 1 communicable diseases as we've seen in the past, but that is determined at a state at the DHS level. That's not something we have the capability of changing in the category. It probably will come with the next couple of variants. It's just not there right now. So that's why we're treating it like it is the measles or mumps, because that's how it's categorized at the state level.
Right.
So like plague, rabies, I'm just looking at the list, right? It's not flu, even on that list.
No, and this is why.
Hepatitis, cholera, anthrax.
And And that's why we have been doing our best for over 2 years. So,
But just to be clear, tonight, we're not voting on making that change to an operational standpoint, pushing it to the board policy enforcement. So that's something we consider in the future, so that's not.
well, I realize that it's just a consideration because that is, even when we discussed about it in December, that was kind of our mindset was we were quarantining and contact tracing because of the communicable disease directive. But it's not really acting that way. It's much more transmissible, especially with the pandemic. So, and we also don't have mandatory vaccination requirements. So this is why it's different. And I just don't know if we've had the conversation specifically in the medical advisory panel or even if it matters, but it's different.
Mr. Rowe.
Thank you. One clarification on the recommendations in the second to last bullet in the recommendation section or the sub bullet. I know we had a conversation about would this onus be on staff or would this be on families? In that sub bullet, it says parents and guardians can choose to have the school enforce this additional 5 days of mask wearing, or they can choose to keep their student home for a full 10-day quarantine/isolation. So to me, I just think we should be really clear about what the words are, because the words are the words. And if we want different words, then we should put in different words. But the way this is written, we are saying that parents who have a student who have just finishing up being COVID positive for 5 days, they're sending their kid to school, and the guidelines say, or the recommendations say, they can choose to have the school enforce that kid will wear a mask all day. And so, as written, that is on the staff. Let's point that out as something we should maybe dig into. Thank you.
Dr. Reeds, can you address, do your recommendations address capacity limits at sporting events, get-togethers, and all those things? How would that change into this?
It does not address capacity levels at sporting events. I think that comes along with the infection rate levels of 1 or 2. And if we reach infection rates of 1 or 2, then capacity levels should be modified. It's I spoke with one board member earlier this evening where we talked about right on the heels of your decision to make that to give families that choice. If we ever get to level 1 or 2, we had the first East-West game, and that was right on the edge of Omicron, and that spiked. I don't know how many students were exposed that evening. So I think we should follow as much of the data as possible. And if the data is telling us that we're not at a level 1 or 2, then we should adhere to it. And Ms. Neal, you asked a question in terms of capacity with the recommendation. Our ability to move our quarantine duration to 5 days, I think, is significant for families and for children to make sure that they're able to get back in school as much as possible. Our recommendation also allows our infrastructure to address the volume of work that we have. I spoke with a colleague earlier today that has a school system that's about 40% our size, and they have the same amount of nursing support that we have for 40% our size. And so when they said, well, we have a modified contact tracing process, and that's a modified contact tracing process, we're asking our team to utilize a contact tracing model that we had in place during the 2021 school year during the Omicron variant. No wonder we were seeing some of the stressors that were happening and I have to express to you, this is where the science and the medical component of things is really important, but I also have to express to you what the stress that's happening to the staff. And the feedback I'm getting from principals and staff is that we have administrative assistants and other people who are leaving their jobs in tears. So they're leaving their jobs in tears because they're in all they're doing all day is calling families about quarantine and trying to tell them how long their students can't be in school. And we talked about the social emotional challenge to students when we tried to interview them during contact tracing during December, the December board meeting, is creating a lot of angst for students. They're not giving us accurate information. They're worried about what it's going to mean for their classmates if they give us accurate information. So these recommendations is to keep students safe. It's to still make sure that we keep our eye on making sure that students are safe, but at the same time, being realistic about what we're able to manage in terms of communication and notifying families.
And one other question under this, so are teachers treated differently than students, or would they come back after 5 minutes?
They have the option. They have the option of coming back after 5 days, they would mask days 6 through 10, or they have the option of staying home days 6 through 10 as well. I think we want to give staff that opportunity to choose what they feel is best for them.
And that's regardless of the vaccination status.
Just to respond to Mrs. Neufeld, so for me, I can't be here tonight without making some changes, even if it's piecemeal. We have to get kids back in school. The volume of quarantines is just not acceptable for me. And if that means we have to look at it in chunks, Mr. Rowland, to your point, and we passed several of these and we have to hold on another one or two. I do think that it would be just really poor on our part to put this off another week even. We have to be responsive. I mean, these high school kids are starting their second semester. They need to get, a good start. They need to get to know their teachers. They need to I literally spent all last week talking with colleagues all over the country. I looked at probably 50 plus school district websites trying to find comparables. Mr. Rowland, as a former teacher, I totally appreciate your point on teachers being the ones that have to play cop on this. And any district communication that you will find that is following the CDC says basically 5 days and then mask 5 days. I've asked people on the way over here, I was talking to my girlfriend in New Jersey, I'm like, what are your folks doing? And she says, they leave it up to the families, and the majority of families do it. Some folks don't. So I think this is the world we live in right now. Similarly, if we, when the thing passed in December about masking, my own kid is like, well, I'm going to still mask. Well, that's what our family is going to do, even if it's recommended versus required. So I think, unfortunately, as much as this is a public health issue, we have to also acknowledge that we are running a giant business here too. And for me, there's at least some things on this list that we have to move forward with tonight. And if they don't pass, then we bring it back again. I just couldn't in good conscience leave tonight without addressing at least some of these things.
Question, Phillips. Yeah, can you speak to how does this impact the relationship with the public health folks in Wauwatosa, right, with the public health department? Do we, give them the list of positive names? Could they trace and quarantine? How does that, logistically, how does that work? Would a parent get a notification from us in the city, or just thinking about, I'm not sure how that works.
So legally, we are obligated to notify the health department of any reportable communicable disease. So we would continue to let them know if there's ever any cases of COVID positive individuals in our schools. They would continue to notify or contact those families as they've been doing all along, and they would contact trace with them as well. So families would have the option of identifying close contacts for their students when the health department reaches out.
Okay. So the health department will be doing that contact tracing.
They have
been doing historically.
They have done contact tracing.
Yeah.
We've also done contact tracing.
Yeah.
It's just what they jointly we concluded they didn't understand the school environment and couldn't accurately contact trace and rely on the interview portion.
Yeah.
That's going to continue to be the case, that they can only rely on the interview portion. The interview portion is optional.
Okay, sure, that makes sense. No, thank you for that.
Baker, you mentioned some amendments. Would you like to bring those forward?
Yes. So I'd like to propose an amendment that we carve out junior kindergarten. I believe it's consistent with how we have operated, that we have not shifted eligibility for mask optional until all students at a certain grade level have been eligible for vaccination. And it's that we hold junior kindergarten as mask required up until the point vaccines are eligible for whether it's 6 weeks after that point or 8 weeks after that point. And then we shift at that point to a mask optional environment in junior kindergarten environment. Again, my reasoning behind that is it's consistent with how we've operated, where we have shifted high school students were eligible to be, high schools were eligible to be mask optional after when they were eligible for full vaccination. Middle school, and elementary, as of I think the 18th of January officially. So I'd offer that amendment for discussion.
So just to summarize, you're saying junior kindergarten would be separate from the other students and that they would still be required to wear masks until reach level 1.
Until 8 weeks after vaccine eligibility for is it age 2 to 4 at this point.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on this amendment before we vote?
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Sure.
Does that include our TOTS programs too, just for clarity?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I think I heard the amendment correctly. It's about junior kindergartners. Can you slowly state it again directly into the microphone, just so I'm sure exactly what the words are?
So the amendment would be to carve out junior kindergarten and ages younger than 4 in all programs that affect students who are not yet eligible for the vaccine from the capacity to be in a mask optional classroom. That masks be required until 8 weeks following eligibility at that age level of all students in the classroom.
I suspect we might have additional amendments after this. So I'd like to do voting on the amendments before, so we have what our final solution is that we're voting on before we get to public comment. Are there any other questions? Discussion on Dr. Jessica. Just a minute. On the amendment.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jess Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
No.
Mr. Dillman.
No. The amendment passes. That will be part of the final resolution. Let's start with any other proposed amendments. Okay. Same time. Mr. Rowan?
Give it a shot. All right, I will move to amend that we do not require quarantines for in school or out of school exposures.
Amendment is not quarantines for in school or out of school exposures.
Can you say a little bit more about that? So this is,
Yes, we should have seven.
Second.
Thank you.
sorry. So this is the first bullet point, Sean?
Yeah.
So it's the Wauwatosa School District will not require quarantine for in-school or out-of-school exposures?
Correct.
Can you tell me more about what's behind that?
Sure. Again, I just think that there are so many kids who are being inadvertently caught in a quarantine net that we are capturing way too many non-COVID kids who do not have COVID and having them quarantine at home. So what this amendment would do is that if you are exposed, you got a close contact, I guess.
Yeah.
To be clearer. If you had a close contact, you should monitor for symptoms. You should not come to school if you have symptoms. Text, to be sure. But at the same time, you don't want hundreds and hundreds of kids quarantining at home who are not COVID positive. That's the policy goal. For many, I think we're not being specific enough. And by removing these layers, we'll have more kids and bus.
So then just for clarification, so we would remove, how does that differ?
It's just
in school.
Yeah.
any exposure.
Sure.
So we're not just limiting it to exposure at school, but in the community. It is. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Any discussion on this amendment? Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Newfeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes. Just give Ms. Newman a minute to catch up. This is a lot to read.
I know, I'm trying to cut.
Appreciate it. Appreciate your work.
Can I ask a question? Are you including household exposures in that, outside of school exposures? So if somebody at home has COVID, then the siblings would not have to quarantine as well? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
I would propose an amendment that we do not require staff to enforce the mask policy for those that come back after 5 days, to the students and their teachers, I'm sorry, students and parents.
Sorry, was your question answered? Did I missed it? What was the answer?
Yes.
That siblings don't have to quarantine.
Right, okay, I'm just looking at all these.
Caleb. Caleb reaction.
So I did make a message at a second. Or else the amendment could finish that first.
Just second that. I mean, remove school enforcement in that sentence.
Correct. To Mr. Rollins' point, I'm not in favor of that for teachers,
Yes.
active police, and that's one more thing that like we do not need to do. Close with that. Okay. Thanks, sir. Go ahead.
Let's come back, because it's a different line,
Sure.
but I'd like to come back to the question.
I have an amendment comes to first.
But are we still keeping, they can choose to keep their student home for a full 10-day quarantine isolation?
Yes. I just don't want teachers.
Take out that first sentence.
I just don't want our teachers. Please, mask, please. Any discussion on the amendment?
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
No.
Ms. Newfeld,
No.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes, the amendment passes. So Dr. Justin. Come to you.
Sean, your earlier amendment was pointing to kind of locations where you would have a passing contact with someone with COVID. Caitlin asked a follow-up question about siblings. We got an email from a parent today who talked about the significant spread across family of COVID. And I know with Omicron, if someone in your household has it, you likely, it seems, anecdotally at least to get it. Do you believe that the policy, the recommendation, policy change that we've passed, to what degree is this likely to either have more students exposed to COVID and then getting COVID? I'm trying to understand it. Did we just go too far?
I often see when COVID is in the home, it will go through the entire home. It's rare when only one person gets it or only part of the family gets it. So if you're exposed to COVID at home, you most likely will get COVID, which means if we're not quarantining siblings who are unvaccinated and have somebody at home who is COVID positive, then we could be sending people who are contagious with COVID to school, because we know that you start to have spread COVID 2 days before you show symptoms. It's a much higher probability than, or if you had a sleepover with somebody who later developed COVID, that's much higher probability than getting it at a sport practice or even coming to school.
So if you have 3 siblings at home, first one gets it. 5 days later, the next one gets it. 5 days later, the third one gets it. That means that first sibling will stay home for 20 days.
Well, with the new guidelines, it would be
right, but
different.
We didn't put in the new guidelines.
If we didn't, we have had some families go through that scenario, and it's been a very long time for that one sibling last standing. Yes.
Thank you. I guess the question I've got to address that is that what used to be written, part of the original amendment, was that they could choose to quarantine at home if that was preferred, if that was thought to be the sensible thing. I'll just give you an example. We have a blended family. 3 of us out of 5 ended up being COVID positive. When the other 2 tested negative, they went to the other house, right? And stayed with the other co-parents, and they didn't get positive. So I think if we create a rule that says the siblings always have to quarantine, that actually wouldn't have worked out for my family because they actually tested negative. So I think, again, if we give it the ability, like we're not saying that they must come to school, we can say they may choose to quarantine, the risk is high, or if they get tested as negative or positive. I don't know. I just think that there are all sorts of different kinds of families, and that we should not just assume that every family is this nuclear family that has that same setup, right?
And we don't. That process right now, when we determine a quarantine for in-home, is a personal conversation with each family to ask out what is their family situation. We often do recommend, separate the child, keep them alone in their room, or if you do have 2 households, can you shift positive people in one, negative people in another, so to reduce their quarantine period at home. So that is what we currently do. We look at each family individually. Some of that was lost in translation with this most recent surge in January due to the overwhelming number of cases. But prior to that, we had personal conversations with every family.
I layer on top of that, Sean, Leanne's second point that I'm going to lean into is families are going to be living if kids are sick and kids have symptoms.
Another one. A COVID positive individual must quarantine for 5 days after testing positive. Students seeking to return after 5 days are required to provide a negative rapid antigen COVID-19 test upon their return to school or work. Students who continue to test positive after the 5-day quarantine may not return unless they test negative. Alternatively, the individual may complete a full 10-day quarantine and return on day 11 without a mask required, or masking is now required. staff member Paul, so that's Jerry out there. Staff member Paul, staff.
Can I ask a point of information from Dr. Means? Do we have capacity to provide rapid antigen tests to all students who would be in this situation? Or is this something that they would have to find?
I think it depends on how many cases there are. If we were like we were the first or second week after January, we would not have that capacity. In fact, DHS said the rapid tests they gave us that we're using in the trailer outside, we were no longer allowed to use on students due to the shortage. So it just depends on how many cases and how many tests are available.
So we're still back to Mr. Rollins amendment. Any other amendments before we comments there? And I will just have you read the amendments prior to public comment.
May I ask a question? Did Mr. Rollins make another motion to amend? The sound quality over the broadcast is very poor. And there's quite a bit of echoing. So I'm still not sure the community really knows what we're doing here with all these changes, piecemeal. I mean, it seems like we're the medical committee here tonight. So help me, please. Where are we now in this process?
There are no current amendments on the floor. Mr. Rollins did make an amendment, but it died for lack of a second. Before we go to public comment, we're going to revisit the amendments that were asked.
Is it possible to put something in print that we can put up onto the Zoom so that the couple hundred participants can get a good sense for what we're voting on, please?
I'm not sure.
I can try to take that. So it'd have to be as amended.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're gonna do it? Yeah.
I think I have never seen it.
Are there any other proposed amendments to Dr. Mead's proposal? Why don't you take a break until 8:50? We'll come back. Ms. Fraley some time to put up the proposed changes to Zoom chat. And maybe I will ask her to read those as well. Read them to right, so. Time to confirm,
Thanks,
and then after that, we will go to public comment. We'll start with those in the room. And then we'll go to those online. So if you're online and you'd like to speak, please raise your hand electronically at this point. We'll be back at 8:50. So as you come to the mic, we've received emails all over the board this week, from every perspective I can imagine. So as you come to the mic and as you listen to others, just ask that everyone be respectful of each other's opinions. We're likely to hear things you don't agree with. Here to come to a great conclusion. Right? So we'll start with those in the room. Everyone will have 3 minutes. So you come to the mic, state your name and address. And I would also add, this is not time for questions. We're not going to have a back and forth pair of questions. This would be a great opportunity to advocate for whatever position is that you want to take or you want the board to. Go ahead, sir.
It's really hard to listen to you guys all chase your tails up here.
Sir, if you could start with your name and your address, please.
My name is Aaron Bridges. I live at 3226 North Mayfair Road. It's obvious that you guys have no clue what you're trying to do. This is all like optics and politics, and nonsense. You guys don't understand even the data that you're trying to interpret. You don't understand what it even means. You're just saying, well, look, the cases are up, they're down. Look, you're operating off a bad premise here. Okay, you're acting like we're dealing with Ebola or some virus that has a 10 or 15% mortality rate. Okay, you're talking less than 1% of people go to hospital and die. And this is with no treatment whatsoever. And despite the government and media's best attempts, we know that there are very effective, very safe, very cheap treatments. That's the key to this, is early treatment. Okay, like any of the doctors in the room, have you guys read any of these papers, like Peter McCullough's paper, the pathophysiological response to early ambulatory treatment for SARS-CoV-2, where he lays out this multi-sequenced drug approach to treating COVID? I mean, this is like a non-issue. It really is. Okay, especially among kids. It says in your own agenda, it says that, you know, you're citing this this paper from the Milwaukee epidemiology intel team, where 0 kids, right? Roland, you mentioned this. No kids are dying from this. Okay, asymptomatic spread of this disease doesn't exist. There's a massive study out of China. They followed 10 million people, 0, not 1 or 2 or a couple or few, no asymptomatic spread. What are you mitigating? You're saying there's no problem. What are we mitigating? The masks, they do nothing. Okay, the CDC has said these cloth masks are facial decorations. Okay, the paper masks, they filter 3 whole microns. These COVID virons are 1/10 of 1 micron. Even the KN95s, they filter 95% of particles 3/10 of a micron. This is not rocket science. You guys are only, I feel, I think, I hope, the CDC, as if the government is ever the best source of information on anything. That's all you listen to is the CDC. There's plenty of well-qualified people. Peter McCullough, Robert Malone. I mean, the list goes on. Michael Yeadon, Wolfgang Woodard. You were talking all over the world.
You have 15 seconds.
Do you even know that other governments around the world, they hand out these early treatment kits to their people? Do you know that? It's only the West, you know, the US, Canada, Europe, Australia, that even get these shots. Okay, that's a whole other side thing.
Thank you, sir.
I hope I said at least a couple little things here that you'll actually go and look at and stop reading these headlines in the New York Times and listening to.
Sir, we'd like to have an opportunity for other government to speak tonight. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Anyone else in the room that'd like to come forward? Please state your name and address. You have 3 minutes.
Joseph Booth, 772 North.
Tim, sorry, Joe. Is the microphone back on? Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Booth, go ahead.
I think you know where I am by now. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Dr. Deeds, as well intentioned as you are, here's the outright fact. There is nothing the Wauwatosa School District is going to do that's going to have any significant effect on the spread of the Omicron variant. We can remove our masks tonight. We can allow capacity to go back at 100%, which is something I have asked for a couple different times, and I'm very saddened to hear, disappointed to hear the stance that's being taken on that fact. So we can go back to 100% capacity. We can stop our contact tracing. We can go back to basically normal. We're not going to see an explosion of COVID in our schools because of the fact that everything we're doing is only for a short period each day, and our students go outside of the schools and go about their normal lives as they would without it. Simple as that. The fact that we're isolating our JK students is pointless. Again, the effect on our kids is near 0. We need to start thinking smart. Our job here, your job here, is for the education of our students, period. You are not the health department. You are not responsible for the health of people at home or the general community. Your job, in short and simple, is education of students. Let's get back to normal student activities like the East-West basketball game. which for a second time will now only be at 50% capacity because of our failure to increase back to 100%. The lives of our students are being affected in the activities and abilities that they are able to do because of what we are doing. Let's change this, and let's change this tonight. Forget the amendments, forget everything else. Let's remove the contact tracing and get back to normal.
Thank you. State your name and address. You have 3 minutes.
Tracy Justin, 1927 North 119th Street. So I don't think at this point it's up for schools to know who's vaccinated or not when it comes to kids. I am vaccinated because I am no spring chicken and I take care of people. But I have 2 teenage sons that, from what I have read, some young males get carditis from the vaccine more so than from COVID. So right now, I don't think it's up to the schools to care really who's vaccinated or not at this point. I have not seen that it's safe for kids yet. My kids have both had COVID in the past. I think they have natural immunity at this point. And that's all I have to say.
Hi, my name's Emily Riley. I live on 3287 North 90th. The contact tracing is a big problem. It's not just kids being out of school and being virtual for however long. My daughter was contact traced twice. So on the 10th and then again on the 13th. So she had to take 2 COVID tests to come back to school. She was negative for. She missed her dance competition. Now her coach doesn't want to put her back in because she's worried half her team was quarantined and only the vaccinated kids can basically maybe go to state, which is completely ridiculous because whether or not you're vaccinated or not, you can still get COVID and be quarantined. So I think it's insane. My daughter missed her final. She was out of school for 2 weeks for being negative because she sits next to another kid with a mask on at school. That's probably when you're the safest. When you're in class and you're sitting next to a kid who's wearing a mask a couple feet away, that's probably when you're the safest. When you're not wearing a mask and you're at lunch and you're hanging on each other, she's 16. She's a junior in high school. She rides to school with her friends. They are getting COVID outside of school. Inside of school is when they're the safest. It's absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe how much school she missed. Last year, she missed a month because we had COVID and she didn't. So after she quarantined for 14 days with us, she had to quarantine another 14 days. She missed a whole month of school last year. This happened over and over and over again. And it's absolutely ridiculous. For education, this is her most important time. This is her junior year of high school. She's going to go to college next year and it's destroyed. It's absolutely insane. Just thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Joel Stanzak. I live in family, 3287 North 90th Street. I just wanted to go over a couple things real quick, kind of like what the other people said. I know you guys are a school board meeting, but we are parents. I don't know if some of you are parents of kids at the school, but we have the kids in the school. So it's probably our best interest to tell you what we want with our kids. And maybe you guys ask us all as individual parents what we want compared to you guys do. That's just, my general sense. It's been admitted that there's 0 deaths, and I've asked others, principals and everything, how many people died, they couldn't tell me, but it's basically 0, right? So like the other guy said, there's 0 deaths with kids, especially younger kids. Older people are dying. Some people with preconditions are dying. And that happens with the flu. It happens with any disease. So I think we just need to get over it. Other counties don't have 0 masks, 0 contact tracing, Waukesha all over the place. Like it's happening. You guys are probably the last to keep holding on to whatever you're holding on to. 6 feet apart. We're not even 6 feet apart right now. And we're not, before we come in here, none of us are tested, right? So how do we know any of you have it? Should we all be contact traced and not go to work, not go to school, not go to anything? I don't think so. Full stadiums, basketball, the Bucks. You see how many kids were out there? How many were wearing masks? Did we see hikes? I don't think so. Let's see. Number of deaths that were admitted by the CDC that were overcounted. Put that into perspective. As she said, we've had both of our kids are from different homes. They were with us during COVID. None of them got it. So I'm sorry, but that just doesn't happen. It doesn't do it the way that they're saying everybody gets it. Did anybody notice when COVID came along, there was like 0 flu cases? I don't know if that's a coincidence. Yeah, let's see. And vaccines. I've had 2 people that I've personally known, or Emily's that known, that got the vaccine. That was perfectly healthy, around 40 years old, and died 2 to 3 days later. Just saying. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Hughes. I live at 2001 North 119th Street. I'd like to thank Dr. Meads for bringing forth this great plan to move our district forward, to get us into 2022 and not stuck in 2020. And now you guys are sitting here and you're dicing up his plan. You hired him to look after our district, to look after our kids when they're at school. Well, we are the guardians of our kids. And we've been mitigating risk for our kids since the day they were born. And I sit here and I hear people say, what if parents send kids to school sick? What if someone goes to school on the 6th, 7th day? Or I couldn't even keep track of the conversation. You're dividing our community. Like we're such ignorant people. We're ignorant parents. Of course, if our kids are sick, we're going to keep them home. But if they're not sick, they need to be in school. My son's a freshman at West. He missed so much prep for finals. He had so many grades that he was on the cusp for that we'll know in a couple days what those grades turned out to be. He was devastated. He's starting off his high school career not on the foot that he wanted to because he's unvaxxed. And you took that away from us too, for us to have medical privacy. Now, everybody in his class knows that he's unvaxxed because he was sent home because he wasn't vaxxed, not because he was sick. And then the other problem we ran into was trying to find a test. So you guys are talking about tests, but have you had to go find a test? They're very hard to come by. One parent that I spoke to, she paid $200 to have her family tested so they could come back to school for finals. So you're putting some financial burden on people when they can't find tests. So we have to not treat our school district like a nursing home. We need to get these kids back to school, in school if they're healthy. And let's start trusting one another. Okay, let's stop dividing people. It's been 2 years and it's been too long. Thank you.
Sorry, I just needed to ask 1 or 2 quick questions.
Sir, if you
About
could
this
state your name and
contact
address, please.
tracing. Now, if someone,
Sir, if you could state your name and address, please.
so my name is Bill Manako, 118.
Thank you.
So if you're in a classroom with someone and they have COVID and your contact traced, you have to go home for 10 days. Is that correct? Or?
Sir, this is just a time for you to add.
I know. I just want. I don't know. I'm never here all the time. Is that correct or not? Yes or no? Here in the health lady right there.
Sir,
yes
this is just a time for you to advocate for what your position is.
I'm trying to advocate my position. Will you answer that quick question?
This isn't a question and answer session.
Okay, so I'll just hypothesize that the answer is yes. Okay, but you're saying now that people that are vaccinated don't have to go home for 10 days. Now, you guys wrote that policy prior to this COVID, this new Omicron, which says that if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, you're going to catch COVID. So are all our teachers being sent home for 5 days because a student in their classroom has COVID? I don't think so. So why are you sending my student home? She had COVID, right? Why are you sending her home? She's healthy. The truth is, whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, you can catch COVID. So why are we doing contact tracing when everyone that's out there in the school can get COVID? Why are you just sending certain kids home? You're discriminating against those children because they're don't have vaccinations. Well, maybe we don't want our kids to be vaccinated because kids die from being vaccinated. Maybe we don't want our kids to have that problem. Maybe we don't want our kids to have a large heart or a heart problem. And you guys are enforcing kids to do this stuff. Let's be sensible. Franklin stopped this contract tracing. Germantown stopped it. Brookfield stopped it. What are you guys waiting for? Stop this contact tracing and let's get on with our lives.
Anyone else in the room that would like to speak?
Deb Pellet, 7435 West Wells. I do like Dr. Mead's proposal, and I'm asking the board to approve it. I also like the recommend after the 5 days, the recommended but not required to bring back a negative test. Just today, we saw our family physician who told us you can actually test positive for weeks and weeks. And so that does concern me. So I like the way Dr. Means had written this. I truly hope that the board would adopt this. I was thoroughly confused last week to get a call from the health department and the district nursing department. Literally within 20 minutes of each other, I felt I was on like some reality TV show. And the health department is telling me after 5 days, your kid is, good to go without symptoms. But the school district is saying 10 days. So it became extremely confusing to me. My child could have gone to the bowling alley where her class was going to be per the health department, but not the school district. So it was mind-boggling to me. Lastly, just talking with, because I have to say something about special ed. Just talking about some of our students with IEPs. There's about 900 of them. I realized that our contingency plans may not all be up to date with the IEPs. There are probably, we have about 900 kids with IEPs in the district. I looked at mine. It's not up to date. So it should not be incumbent upon the parents to ask for education with our students with disabilities if our children are at home. They're, DPI, and I contacted them to talk a little bit more about this. So I think we're also missing that component. But I would encourage you to adopt the plan that Dr. Means has put forward before you.
Jamie, it looks like we have no one else in the room, so we're closing public comment for those in the room, and we move to those online.
Okay, first up is Matt Wald. Please state your name and address. You have the microphone.
Yes, thank you. My name is Matt Wold. My address is 729 North 113th Street. This is the first meeting that I've been in attendance for, and I joined today because I guess I'd like to say that I'm a parent. I'm a victim of the contact tracing. So my daughter had to miss some days of school because of contact tracing reported by the team. And despite the fact that we had her tested and she was negative, was able to return to school, her class was completely decimated. When she went back, I was so excited. I was like, how was your day back at school? She was like, it was terrible. I was like, why? What happened? She said, there were only 4 other kids in my class. So that's just not acceptable. All right. I just gotta say that outright. And from what I've heard tonight, I know that Superintendent Dr. Means, and I think, it's my first night, I think is board member Roland. I think you two are on the right track. You know where we need to get. It's just a matter of getting everyone else on board to get us there. We need to stop contact tracing. We need to stop masking the kids. I don't know how you're going to do it, but I just have faith that you will. And that's really all I have to say my first time out.
If we could, I don't want to discourage anybody, but if you applaud, it overrides the audio on the Zoom session. So if you wouldn't mind holding off in the room while we allow online attendees to talk, that would be appreciated. Next up is Adam. Adam, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address. Adam, are you there? Adam? Okay, I'm going to disable Adam for now. We'll move on. Christian and Ali Howard. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Christian Howard, 2637 North 69th Street. I have a daughter that goes to Roosevelt School and a son that goes to speech at Roosevelt. He is only 3. He'll be in school next year. And he is not vaccinated. My daughter is vaccinated. I listened to the amendments. I think some of them are good and some of them are bad tonight. I don't think COVID positive people should be back in school before 10 days. If we're going to allow that, what's the point of the rest of the precautions? Because we're allowing someone has a communicable disease back in school too soon. 10 days, they can come back because that meets the guidelines. Siblings of COVID positive people should be quarantined as well until they have a negative test, because as the nurse said, most of the time, not all times, most people in the household get it. And I think there's a lot of confusion about contact tracing and confusing that with quarantining. Without contact tracing, you don't know if you should be watching for symptoms closer than you normally would. So I agree we should continue contact tracing, but reduce the burden on students and parents and teachers, and reduce quarantine time periods or limit them altogether, as board member Rowland suggested. I heard a lot of talk about like trusting parents to do the right thing. And while I would love to go down that road, unfortunately, people not wearing masks and supporting the greater community by protecting them kind of negates the fact that parents are doing the right thing for the community to begin with. So if there's going to be a policy to enforce guidelines, it should be enforced by the school, not trusting the parents at this point, because not all can be trusted, unfortunately. Thank you.
Okay, next is Jennifer Kraft. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Hi there, Jennifer Kraft, 8818 Ravenswood Circle. I come at this from the perspective of teaching for nearly 30 years. We need to look around to neighboring districts where quarantining is optional for close contacts. We need to get the kids in school as much as possible. We are expending so much energy and the resources of the district on trying to mitigate a disease that we have no control over. And no matter what our school district does, we're going to be looking at this issue a year from now. And my suggestion to the board is if we could just spend half as much time getting our reading and our math scores up, we're going to be in a better place a year from now. Get the kids in school as much as possible. Virtual learning is theater at this point, and we need to start being realistic. Tonight, I think it may be a convergence of all the energy, but I agree with Mr. Rowland in that we need to look at the fact that the students are not at risk of hospitalization at the same rate as adults, and we need to let that be our guide. I am very sad that Dr. Jessup Anger is trying to condemn the junior kindergartners to a future of wearing masks when, as Mr. Rowland said, they are not at risk of hospitalization or death. So I'm really hoping you start to look at education, and that is where the resources and the energy starts to need to go, rather than disease mitigation, because the district will always lose because the virus will always win. And our primary goal as a district needs to be to educate the kids. Thank you so much.
Margaret Frisch, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Oh, sorry, I am up for the next topic.
But I will say, if you guys are all about masking, nobody's wearing N95 masks. You guys have paper and cloth masks, which aren't effective. Thank you.
Okay. Kristen Bridges. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Yes, hello, Kristen Bridges, 1218 West Silver Spring. I want to say thank you to the board and Dr. Means for your time. Hope my audio is okay. I did a bit of adjusting. I am also a proud Wauwatosa educator. I'd like to piggyback on what Jennifer said, that our job, as we know, is to educate children, to make them feel safe and connected. And part of our district mission is to make sure that students feel as though they belong and that they have a place with us. And our job as a district is to give these students access to equitable education, an environment within which they can learn and thrive. And we can't possibly do that when we're separating students by who's vaccinated or who's unvaccinated, particularly when we know that whether or not you have a vaccine does not prevent the contraction or the spread of COVID. For every one person you know who's been vaccinated and doesn't have COVID, I will show you 50 who has. So we also know for a medical fact that COVID's not severely affecting children. It's been outlined in our district email. It's been mentioned several times tonight. And I would like to say personally, since we're all, of course, approaching this from an educator standpoint on the board anyhow, and from Dr. Means' standpoint, that I teach kindergarten, and the pain that I feel every time one of my students is in the middle of a lesson and can't scaffold their learning because they were quarantined for 10 days and they missed almost 2 full weeks of instruction is gut-wrenching. And the devastation that just pours over me when one of my little kindergarten students says to me, Miss Bridges, my head hurts, Miss Bridges, my tummy hurts, because I know that they've been wearing a mask steadily in a way that's not safe for them. They're inhaling their own carbon dioxide all day. We know that breathing is an exchange of gases, right? You breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon dioxide, and all of this bacteria and particles that are being gathered. I had a student just this week who he's very healthy, dry heaving in the middle of a lesson. And when I pulled his mask off to make sure he didn't vomit on himself, I won't describe the disgust I saw inside of the mask. I think that we really need to take a look. We like to say follow the science, but that's something that we actually need to do. We need to follow the science. We need to recognize that what we're doing is not, it may be an arbitrary measure, but it's causing harm. And we're charged with keeping these kids safe and loving them and educating them. And we can't do that when we're adhering to these practices that we know now are not effective. Dr. Means said earlier, we are practicing 2020 measures and it's 2022. We know too much now to not use it. So I am imploring the board and Dr. Means, please at least keep this open as a conversation. If this isn't something we can come to a resolution to tonight, we know better and we have to do better. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Laurie B. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Lori Barnes. I live on 920 Glenview Avenue. Am I good to go? Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. We can hear you.
Okay. So I received an email on January 13th saying that my son had been exposed on January 5th to January 7th and that he could not come back until January 18th. And I'm not persuaded that this was reasonably motivated. When a policy is in place, there needs to be sound logic and evidence supporting it. And I feel like this wasn't done. So I'm here to ask a few questions. Why are only unvaxxed kids required to quarantine? The reported number of COVID hospitalizations, which is the primary metric tracking the severity of the pandemic, was grossly inflated for children by 40%. When the FDA authorized vaccines for children, they did it under emergency use authorization, which means it was given without the kind of extensive studies everyone would prefer done. As a parent, I have made that decision by weighing the risks. Even Dr. Anthony Fauci said early in December, Omicron, with its extraordinary, unprecedented degree of efficiency of transmissibility, will ultimately find just about everybody. Those who have been vaccinated, unvaccinated, and boosted will all be exposed. When the FDA voted for the emergency use authorization for 5 to 11-year-olds, board member Eric Rubis said, "We're never going to learn about how safe this vaccine is unless we start giving it." Stephen Barrell, the infectious disease epidemiologist and physician at Johns Hopkins, wrote in the British Medical Journal about the risk-benefit calculus of vaccinating children against a disease that poses very low likelihood of severe outcome. With this information, among many others, I have weighed the cost benefit for my son, who is more likely to develop myocarditis from the vaccine than the severe reaction from COVID. Zeke Emanuel, the member of Biden's administration COVID advisory team, said, "We have entered a new normal, the need to exit the emergency phase and enter a period of learning to live with the virus." Policies pertaining to COVID across the country have largely become forms of virtue signaling of public health performance. And because of that, it is unsurprising why no scientific evidence is brought forth and why they are often blatantly self-contradictory. For example, the CDC and the AAP both advise masking for children 2 to 5, while the WHO states children aged 5 years and under should not be required to wear a mask. I'm not saying that COVID isn't affecting people, but how we choose to react is solely up to us. Barry Weiss from the New York Times wrote today, "The pandemic policies will be remembered as catastrophic moral failure by the younger generation. People are anxious, depressed, and suicides are up for young girls 51%. It's time to end this. COVID paranoia is slowing childhood development. Omicron is causing shortage of essential workers such as teachers, subs, lunch workers, and students even. And that is a public policy decision, not a health decision. My child was refused in-person learning simply because he sat next to someone but was asymptomatic. Natural immunity exists and should be acknowledged. I ask you to choose policies based on logic, evidence,
Thank
and
you.
science."
You're in 3 minutes. Jamie, move on to the next person.
Sorry, I was muted myself. Rookie mistake. Todd Dahlgren, you now have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Todd Dahlgren, 1647 North 122nd. I would like the request that the board approve the proposal from Dr. Means. It is based on epidemiological data in the county. Additionally, it is reasonable based on actual facts of what is happening in the district, and it is not based on perceptions or misconceptions. Thank you.
Julie Alexander, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Okay. My name is Julie Alexander. My address is 7224 West State Street, Unit 1A in Wauwatosa. I am stating that I am in support of Dr. Means' memo that we're looking at right now. I do have some concerns about children and families where COVID's been at, coming to school because they may get COVID as well. So that is somewhat of a concern to me here. Also, hoping that the school district can update their IEPs with children, students. Thank you so much.
Ben, you now have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Okay. My name is Ben. You guys are going to notice based off of my address that I pay for my student to be in the Wauwatosa School District. My address is 3355 South 113th Street. I went out of my way to make sure my kid went into a good school district, being Wauwatosa instead of West Dallas. I would also like to it be taken into consideration that my kid's 8 years old. I don't have any intentions on vaccinating my child. And I don't think his education should be ripped away from him because of a decision that his parents made. I don't think it is any of the school district's business whether or not my kid is vaccinated or not. I don't think they should even know or have any say-so on whether they are or not. I also don't think that all these virtual learnings that they took into place over the past year and a half were effective by any stretch of the imagination. Because me being at home, I've noticed a drastic decrease in the amount of education, or I guess you could say knowledge, that has been absorbed by my 8-year-old. I think we're blowing this way out of proportion, and I think we need to move a lot more forward in worrying about their education and not their health, and leave that to the parents to make the decisions on their child's health and not the schools. That's just, your job is strictly to educate my child and to give them a good head start and to make sure that they're good functioning parts of society when it comes to knowledge and making sure that they have the successful tools that they need. And I think Dr. Means' proposal is 100% accurate, needs to be fully taken into consideration. And I also think you guys need to take into consideration more of what your community says, because without your community, your school board doesn't exist. That's it.
Okay, next in line is Brandon. Brandon, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Yep, Brandon Hennick, 2350 North 91st Street. I just wanted to start, thanks to all of you in the room there, in the room there sharing opinions, and also the whole board. I know everyone's trying to make the best decision that they can for our children. I'd like to thank Dr. Means for the plan that he put forward. I'd like to state that I do support the plan. I think it's well thought out and based on, moving us forward towards having our kids in school as much as possible. I do want to say I'm a bit disappointed as the parent of a 4K student with the change for 4Kers. As we heard from a lot of the teachers that have spoken already, and I had a chance to recently volunteer at school and heard similar things from other teachers, that the masks do make it tough on the learning process and make it hard for development. These kids are learning letter sounds and words and can't see their teachers' mouths, and their teachers can't see theirs either. So I'd like you to reconsider that, please. Just for the children's development. I guess that's the main piece I wanted to share with you. Otherwise, I would just say, let's make decisions based on science and risk. It's very minimal in this case. And what we need to do for our children's education, not on fear and hype. Thanks for the time. And I really appreciate all the work being done.
Lisa Jout, you can talk now. Please state your name and your address. Lisa, you're muted. Okay, we'll come back to Lisa. Mary Jo Rando, you can talk now. Please state your name and your address.
Mary Jo Randall, 727 North 59th Street. My comment is simply on policy 8450. I would ask the board to review that. I believe that it's clear in the direction that the superintendent, I'll quote it, superintendent shall develop administrative procedures for the control of communicable disease, which shall include the following. And this would be done in accordance with the Public Health Department and state statutes. So while you've all been working hard to try to figure this out, I believe that the responsibility for creating the mitigation plan is Dr. Means' responsibility. Thank you.
Jessica Conway, you can talk now. Please state your name and your address.
Hi, thank you. It's Jessica Conway at 6524 Betsy Ross Place. I want to state that I 100% support Dr. Means and very much appreciate Sean Rowland and how he's demonstrated that you can follow data and watch how things evolve and be influenced over time and recognize that the practices that worked 2 years ago are no longer effective. And I think that's what it really comes down to, which is when a process is so complicated that it can't be effectively administered, it's broken. It has to be fixed. So we need to do something to help get more of our children back into the classroom, to help our teachers deal with everything that's being thrown at them, to help, everyone be able to move forward. And so I just ask for everyone to please keep an open mind and think about how they can serve the goal, which is to educate children.
Adam, you are allowed to talk. Please state your name and your address.
Adam Davis, 2636 North 90th Street. As I've been sitting through this, I just want to point out a few things. I agree and I fully support the plan that Dr. Means. I just don't understand why this board, every time I watch these meetings and listen to these meetings, I just don't understand why you continue to make things more complicated. Dr. Means met with the medical advisory panel about a week ago. I watched the whole meeting. It's very clear to me that many of you on the board did not watch the meeting, maybe got notes at best, but didn't seem to be aware of anything that went on there. That panel helped him come up with this plan and was okay with the plan. He brings it to you guys and has told you over and over and over again about the problems that have been created by this and the nightmare situation about these kids missing school. And meanwhile, we have some board members who are sitting here talking about how COVID's not the same as other communicable diseases and it's more contagious, which is a flat out misinformation. One of you, I believe Mrs. Muehlfeld, said that COVID is not the same and it's more contagious than other communicable diseases. That's a quick Google search will tell you that that's absolutely incorrect. No one questions it. I also wanted to strongly disagree with I believe it's the nurse who said that when a family gets it, all of them are going to get it. That's simply just false as well. And it's just really bothersome to hear these misinformations. There are all kinds of instances where families don't get it commonly. And there's a lot of states that is not the case. I just don't know why you guys continue to try to make everything that should be simple and move forward so difficult. The first comment tonight, the one thing he had right, he said, you sit here and you chase your tail. You make everything into such a headache for all of us. The process is simple. Pass this plan, get out of the way of the school administration, let the teachers and the students and the administration and parents make decisions for their kids and stay out of the way. That is what you were voted in to do. There's clearly a majority of people in this room and on these Zoom calls that agree with him. So do the right thing, vote for it. The fact that you were considering not voting on it tonight is an absolute dereliction of duty. I was shocked to even hear that come up. I mean, you know how time sensitive it is. This is just appalling. You guys need to do your job, make the vote, and get on with it. Everyone else has gone back to semi-normal life in school. We shouldn't be masking. The fact that we're still quarantining kids that haven't even been sick is way past due. So get with it and do your job and let the school administrators do what they need to do. Thank you.
Zoibar Granger, you can talk. Please state your name and your address.
Hi there, I'm Zolbert Granger. I live at 2378 North 67th Street. First of all, I would like to address the factor that I am in full 100% support of Dr. Means' proposal plan. So let me talk about students in school and how they perceive this mask mandate. A bunch of these students feel like they can't get enough oxygen. A lot of the kids are starting to feel headaches that is unbearable. I've started feeling that today. And also the other thing that really, it hurt me to see this at first hour in the morning at 8 a.m. Our algebra teacher told numerous students to put their masks on, and a lot of them got sent down to the office. You know how much trauma you're facing on these kids? I don't even want to attend the school district anymore. And I looked up to you guys. Because let that sink in, board of directors. Let that sink in. Because if you really want to fight for students' education, you will listen to those students and that community. Because a true educator and a scholar will listen. And I have not seen any of that. And I'm highly disappointed in that. I came from Milwaukee Public Schools, which I had absolutely no respect. When I came here, it was a burden taken off of my shoulder. Until I start seeing that, that's bringing back post-traumatic stress on me. And I cried to my mother today because of this mask mandate. And you know what? This will come back to haunt our generation. And we're going to remember this district for what you have caused to these children. I am so disappointed. I can't even believe in words. I want to advocate for these students. And I will be serving on the United States House of Representatives when I'm older, the fight for kids who don't have voices like this. And you know what? Take this into consideration. I am turning 18 as of May, and I will have the legal constitutional right to vote. All right? I yield back my time. Thank you.
Mandy sorry, I'm going to butcher your name here. Mandy Patoki. You can talk. Thank you. Sorry. State your name and your address, please.
Good evening, Mandy Potapenko, 2400 block North 81st Street. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm the parent of a 4-year-old junior kindergartner, so much of my concern in addressing the board this evening was really in relation to that. So I'm appreciative of the vote that occurred earlier to separate out the junior kindergartners. Obviously, parents of children under the age of 5, we have not yet been offered the ability to vaccinate our children. So I appreciate those who are eligible to make that choice. However, we as parents we have not yet been given that opportunity. So again, I'm appreciative of the board of making that choice. Unfortunately, COVID's here and it's been with us for some time. And as much as all of us want it to go away, by pretending it doesn't exist will not help the situation. And to the woman who spoke earlier this evening about 4Ks and masks, unfortunately, my son was, barely over the age of 2 when masking began. So many of my son and his friends barely bat an eye when wearing their masks, both at school as well as in other extracurricular activities. And the other parent who made a comment earlier about hindering their learning, I absolutely agree. And in the case of junior kindergartners, as numbers come down, I would absolutely be willing to revisit that conversation as time goes on. As a family, we've been subject to 2 quarantines this school year due to close contact, and I recognize that quarantines disrupt our personal and professional lives, and it's a challenge for our kids in school. And because of that, I just ask that the district continue to do contact tracing in the best way possible. So if that means phone calls are too difficult, then the letters are absolutely sufficient. It's important for us as families to be able to make our best choices when having our children around the elderly or those who are vulnerable. So it is important for us to at least have that information. So whatever it is to ease the burden on nursing staff, I'm open to that as long as families are able to receive that communication. So thank you for the time. I'm appreciative of the board, the teachers, and the health staff, both within the district as well as the medical advisory committee. So thank you.
Chris Hughes, you can talk. Please state your name and your address. Chris, you need to.
Sorry, thank you. I was muted. Chris Hughes, 2001 North 119th Street. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I just want to first off say that I 100% approve the proposal that has been brought forward by Dr. Means. And, I want to piggyback off some other callers and say that, this board, for whatever reason, you really do complicate things. I mean, at one point tonight, it seemed like you were trying to cover every possible exposure scenario that could happen. And we don't need to overcomplicate this with the state that we are with COVID. The school does not need to do contact tracing. If someone is positive in school, then you send home a letter to those that were possibly in contact with them. That's what other districts do. It's not that hard. If you feel sick, you stay home. If you're not sick, then you go to school. It's really as simple as that. And I also agree with others that had said that this board needs to quit acting like they're a medical board when you are not. Okay, so you have a medical board that you've enlisted to give you guidance, but then when it comes to actually making a decision, you don't want to listen to their guidance. You don't even want to listen to the CDC tonight, and you still want to stick with a 10-day quarantine or say that you have to get a test, when I think a lot of you maybe have no idea how hard it is to go get a rapid test. It's not easy. I've had to do it. So again, stop making this so complicated and start focusing on the education. I think it would be much more productive if these school board meetings started talking about the decline in the kids' education over the last 2 years. It's really scary. So stop with the COVID. Let's move on. Let's pass what Dr. Means has proposed, and let's move on and then start dealing with the education. Thanks for your time.
Nate Gay, you can state your name and your address.
Nate Gray, 2479 North 64th Street. My son just had COVID. Couple days of not being able to breathe, no voice, sore throat, blah, blah, blah. He recovered, thankfully. But what parent would wish this on their child? I don't understand why masking is such a big, stressful ask of us. If it can prevent the transmission. Seriously, I would rather my child wear a mask than have to deal with not breathing. And that's a very simple thing I would like to think for parents to wish on their kids. Hey, wear a mask. Maybe you can breathe. That's all.
Chris Hughes, you can talk and state your name and your address. Oh, wait, sorry, you just on it. Michael Long, please state your name and your address. Michael, you have to unmute. You're still muted.
Sorry about that. This is actually Danielle Long, 2600 North Menominee River Parkway. I'd like to start by really thanking Dr. Means for all of your tireless work on this and advocating for all of our children and all of the students. I also really want to thank the teachers who spoke up. I think this is a long time coming. I know a lot of teachers who are afraid to speak up, but we really need to hear from them because they're seeing what's happening in the front lines. I also want to bring to people's attention that vaccinations are in Infinite Campus if you were not aware of that. So people know whether or not your child is vaccinated or not. I will say that my entire family is vaccinated. So take that for what it's worth. I think it is an incredibly personal choice. It's a personal choice that people make for their families. I am troubled by certain comments that were made at last week's medical advisory panel about unvaccinated students. Dr. Means talked a lot about being educators and hearing from community members that parents are telling them that they need to be educators and not public health officials. He talked about hearing that they are failing their kids, and that's a difficult message to hear. One of the medical advisory panel members commented, in frankly, my opinion, a pretty judgmental way, that she assumed that the people that were most frustrated in voicing their concerns to Dr. Means are the people who are quarantined, and therefore the 25% who've chosen not to vaccinate themselves and their families. And she referred to them as a loud minority of people who are unhappy. The other 75% she assumed are following along with public health guidelines. I was really troubled by that, because are we just supposed to leave behind the other 25% of students who are unvaccinated? We're not going to be concerned about them. I was taken aback, and I went back to listen to it a couple of times, because we now have a system of inequity in the education of the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. That's really concerning to me, and it's disappointing that in a district that puts so much emphasis on equity, we're currently creating inequitable access to education for our students. That concerns me, and I hear a lot about, especially at the high school level, the students who were quarantined around finals time. My son last spring was quarantined at finals time before they were eligible for vaccine. I saw the stress and the anxiety that this put on him. And I feel for these kids. This is, it's very different for a high school kid than it is for example, a third grader. So we're punishing students for a very personal family decision. I urge the vote to follow Dr. Means' guidance, to not have a stricter guidelines than the CDC. And thank you for your time tonight.
Kirsten, you're allowed to talk. Please state your name and your address.
Kirsten Dodlick, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, Kirsten Dodlick, 2520 North 93rd Street. I'd like to voice my support for Dr. Means' plan. I also don't quite know why we would hold on to something that, quite frankly, isn't working. We've been through the contact tracing quarantine hell in the form that we had left town. We arrived in a different state, and I get an email that 6 days ago, my son was in contact with a kid who tested positive. Okay, now what do we do? Well, CDC says 5 days, so we're good. The fact is, he went to school these other days because we didn't know. So 3 days later, I get the next contact tracing notice. That was in between getting the first contact, leaving town. In between was another contact, so I get that notification. I finally got a notification of contact tracing for a day he wasn't even in school. So now I'm sitting in Podunk trying to find a testing site. I was also not totally clear per the email whether I needed a rapid test, whatever it's called, the CPR test or whatever it's called. It said a lab test, not a home test. And I did what everybody is told to do. I Googled it. It's really hard to find. I finally got lucky, but of course now the tests take so long that the result came. I was finally able to get my kid back 1 day early from the last quarantine. So all this during finals, incidentally, last finals, he was also out because some other kid had COVID. He was negative all times. We tested at home. He was negative. But I understand the school wants a lab test, so you gotta wait, if you can even get one. The whole system isn't working, so I'm not mad at it's not working, it's just too much. Obviously, we just can't get a handle of on this, but then just maybe get rid of it. Regarding the masking, it's maybe a bit of a personal thing, but speaking from a minority point of view, English is my second language. It is much harder for me to understand everybody when I can't see them talk. That's why I also don't like the phone as much as I like to text or sit opposite somebody. I know there's other people for whom English is the second language, students, or maybe students with learning difficulties. It is actually a hardship when everybody's always masked up. I want to thank you for your time. And again, please pass Dr. Means' suggestion. I would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Lisa, you can please state your name and your address. Lisa, we can't hear you. Okay, we'll try it one more time after this next person. Melissa Burdick, you're allowed to talk. Please state your name and your address. Sorry.
Yes, hi, this is Melissa Burdick. I'm at 316 North 93rd Street. And I understand everybody's frustration with COVID. We wish it would all go away. I applaud the board for being very mindful and trying to come to a conclusion that is supporting our students. I am a mother of a junior kindergartner, and I just want to provide this example of the return from Christmas break. Her teacher missed the first couple of days after returning due to having symptoms. She tested negative, returned to school on day 3, only to test positive 2 days later. So I have experienced this quarantine as well. It's frustrating. But the point I want to make tonight is I completely support Dr. Means' proposal and these recommendations for reducing the quarantine to 5 days. But also wanting to just make everybody aware that the community spread is the main concern. And as a medical professional, the numbers are not where we need them to be for our group at large. 9-hour wait times in the emergency room, 30 plus patients waiting for a hospital bed. The kids, yes, very low risk, but when they're exposed and going places in the community and exposing our vulnerable people, that's the concern. And that's all I have.
Okay, Lisa, we'll try this one more time. Why don't you try talking again? Otherwise, I may promote you to a panelist to see if that helps.
Can you hear me this time?
There we go. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Lisa Yelk, 4104 North 111th Street. At this point, COVID is nearing the endemic phase and will likely be around forever. We need to learn to adjust and live with it, or we will be wearing masks and social distancing for the rest of our lives. I, for one, do not want that for my family. I'm a parent of a kindergartner, so as you can imagine, she has yet to have a normal school year in her 2 years at the Tosa School District. There are many childhood experiences that have been robbed from her and all the other students, as they were, when I look back, were often highlights of when I think of my own school experience. For example, Christmas concerts, field trips, and even being able to interact with her friends at lunch. There are some policies I'm very against. For example, she has to eat lunch in the classroom while watching a video, so she does not talk to other children when she has her mask off. What are we teaching the kids with this? They should be distracted by technology while they eat, so they do not get social interaction that they crave with their friends. This is not what school should look like. It is disrupting the students' mental health. In the community outside of school, stores, restaurants, and almost every other institution is not mandating masking. It is difficult to teach how to speak and pronounce words with masks on. It is impossible to read nonverbal cues and emotions that come with facial expressions. Especially at this young, early age, it is of the utmost importance to learning language and social skills. I urge you to put the decision of masking in the hands of the parents and make it optional. Thank you.
And there are no more hands raised.
Thank you. That closes public comment on this item. We'll go back to the board. Are there any final questions or comments before we vote on the resolution as amended? Mr. Mullins?
I appreciate the kudos. I'll just throw it all away now. The journalist in me has to push back on some of the things that were said. It was raised that we should consider what the community is saying. I hear what has been said in this room this evening and on the Zoom. I think it's also important to point out that in the community survey that was sent out, the vast majority of parents are not in line with this plan. So I just think it's important for people to just recognize, I'm not saying I'm voting against or anything. I just think it's important for people to just recognize where we are as a community. That the vast majority of people in Wauwatosa don't feel like this is the thing. That they feel like this is too fast and not the right thing given where they're at. So I'm not saying.
No, we've already closed public comment. Please.
What that,
No.
leave. What
Sir,
that
if
means.
you can't be quiet, then leave.
What that means is, I think we should be cognizant. Wait. Just wait. Just be cognizant of that. There are lots of different opinions, and will be a tough pill for people to swallow if we do this. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing. In fact, I support it and I will vote for it. And that's a leadership position that we will have to consider. But I'm just asking the community to recognize that the majority of the community is not down with this. And just recognize that that is something to think through. Not necessarily as a vote, but as a change management thing that we will need to address through communications through the staff. People will need to take some time to feel good about this. It's not going to feel good to them. For a lot of people, and I just want to give rise to them. A lot of them are not here, but it's important to just recognize that they voiced their opinion in the survey. The second thing is the medical panel. We're supposed to listen to the medical panel. I think the polite way to talk about the medical panel is undecided. A lot of them were feeling okay with it. The others were not okay with it. So I think there's not necessarily a medical panel to follow because there were differences within the medical panel, just like there are differences within the community. Some were supportive, some were not. It was brought up that this is simple, we should just go with, what's obvious. The community and the medical panel is undecided on this topic. So I'm just telling you, it's not simple. And I'm proud of the way that this board has tried to be nuanced, tried to be thoughtful, tried to truly read every email, read every website, talk to as many stakeholders as possible, and take this seriously. This is not a simple-minded thing that we have been doing for 2 years. This is not some simple thing. We have taken this super seriously because it is important. Whatever number it is. 5 out of 7 of us have kids on the school board. That's just a fact. 5 out of 7 of us have kids on the school board, so just know that. Myocarditis, there's a bigger risk of myocarditis from COVID than there is from the vaccine. That's just another fact. It is.
No, we've already done
it's a fact.
We're done.
Lots of these comments have not been helpful. Many of us, there have been so many comments about the school board of, you haven't watched this medical panel meeting, or what have you been doing? Have you been reading any of it? Yeah, we have been. We have been doing this for 2 years, reading websites, talking to people, talking to the medical panel. We have been doing this, doing the work for 2 years. We have been doing this, trying to figure this out. And I know that there are a lot of people who are passionate about this topic, but that is no reason to be unkind or to say things that are untrue about people that you don't know. The last thing is I would like to move an amendment, a very brief one. Within the second bullet, you can pull that back up. It says, follow the most recent CDC guidelines regarding isolation and out of school exposures. We did talk about out of school exposures already. So we're just like, for the clarity of the community to really understand what we're doing, I would just like to eliminate the line and outside of school exposures, just so it's super clear what we mean. I'll move that as an amendment.
Amendments proposed, is there a second?
Sean, can you repeat that one?
Yes.
Is it isolation or quarantine?
My understanding of the bullet is that it regards quarantine. If that's not the case, then I'm happy to be told that that's not the case. But the way I read it is that regarding isolation and then like second thought and outside of school exposure. So my recommendation is just to take out and outside of school exposures, just so it's clear. But happy to pull that wrong if that's related to isolation and fact.
think there's a difference between, Caitlin, I would refer to you. There's a difference between isolation and quarantine. Right. And I believe the hyperlink of most recent CDC guidelines is regarding isolation.
It has both in there.
It has both in there. So I want to check in with you. And it would be okay for us to delete, as it's wrong, suggesting, and outside school exposures.
Based on the First Amendment you made.
As long as we keep that hyperlink of CDC guidelines.
As long as we keep the word isolation, because isolation is for positive individuals.
Okay.
That's an amendment. Is there a second?
Yeah, second.
Any discussion on the amendment?
Hi, this is Mike Meyer. I have a comment. May I speak?
Yes, we're discussing the amendment that Sean proposed. Ms. Rowan.
Right, I'm speaking to the amendment. I'm not sure on the fly here we know what we're doing. I mean, the words here, follow the most recent CDC guidelines. That doesn't say follow the current guidelines. It says, well, if the guidelines by the CDC change tomorrow, we should follow the changes. So now we're going to start to tinker with a line where it says follow most recent CDC guidelines, and we're going to change it, which implies there's some things where we want to follow the most recent CDC guidelines, but other things where we don't want to follow the most recent CDC guidelines. So, you know, Dr. Means is a reasonable person. He's going to try to do his best. I think we just pass this as it is, and I mean, to wordsmith this more, we're starting to have unintended consequences with the words we're trying to change. For example, with this, to suggest maybe we don't want to follow most recent CDC guidelines with respect to something, when I doubt that's what any of us want to do, to say we don't want to follow most recent CDC guidelines if, for example, in 6 days, the CDC changes their guidelines based on new evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Any discussion on the amendment, Mr. Rowan?
I'll just say, if it's not going to change anything, then I'm fine leaving it. I think it's covered in the first. Well, is your concern, Mr. Rollin, that folks are going to take that somehow as meaning something different? And Caitlin, you're saying that taking it out is not going to change anything else within the proposal?
Well, the first bullet point and second bullet point contradict each other, because in the first bullet point, you're saying no quarantines for any situation. The second bullet point says follow CDC guidelines for outside of school exposures.
So follow CDC guidelines for isolation, and then we're saying not.
That is what you guys are saying, yes.
Got it. Then yes, I am still in favor of your.
Ms. Newman, please call the roll on this amendment.
Ms. Braley?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
No.
Ms. Neufeld? No. Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowley?
Yes.
Mr. Doman?
Yes. Any other board discussion on the resolution as amended? Hearing none, Ms. Newman, you can call the roll on the resolution as amended.
Ms. Braley?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld? Yes. Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Doman?
Yes. Move on to the next superintendent action item, approval of intergovernmental agreement with the City of Wauwatosa. Phillips?
It is recommended that the school board approve the intergovernmental agreement with the City of Wauwatosa to use district schools as polling sites, and the contract is attached. And I so move. Second.
Mr. Doman, may I speak?
I think Dr. Means is going to introduce the topic, and then I can certainly go to you, Mr. Meyer.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. A red line version of the agreement was attached in board docs for community members and board members to review. Two dates, February 21st, 2023 and April 4th, 2023 were added. Based on the conversation from the January 10th meeting, language was modified to reflect that the presence of the police would not serve as a deterrent to voters, that the police would be there to help with traffic flow and parking at the 3 school locations. Those were the major changes in the agreement from January. And in addition, city officials made an attempt to address drawings, at least for Underwood, that was requested by the board.
Mr. Meyer, go ahead.
I just want to say I am very, very pleased that the city and the school district have found a way to cooperate on the voting process in our democracy. I just think this is good for Wauwatosa, that everybody's working together to support voting. Thank you.
Any other board comments, questions?
I think I would highlight something we talked about at the last meeting. These community rooms or spaces that where these voting areas are going to be are also available to the community for all those things. So something to consider for community groups and neighborhoods going forward.
Yes.
So if I may add to that, if you call the rec department, that's where you reserve those rooms. I had a follow-up question after our last meeting with regard to that as well. So that's how one reserves those community rooms for use by members of the community. Thanks.
Comments? I would just add I agree with Mr. Meyer. It's good we built these schools with community rooms, and the idea is to have polling places. It is a significant event for the schools to hold these discussed, realign school schedules. To do that, my concern is, especially as we move to the next action item, where we're charged by the city for our park facilities to use. Just make a note, we're not charging the city to do this. We're doing it because we think it's the right thing to do for the community. I would encourage the city to think of that and maybe consider a way to work with each other for our different facilities. I think that would be a greater use of our community tax amount. Any other board comments, questions? Or we go to community comment on this item. We'll start with those in the room.
Hey, Deb Palik. I remember Mr. Rowland talking about the fees. He brought up something about the fees at the last meeting, that the city charges us for some things. So can there be something in this where we're charged, first of all, we don't want to put undue burden on the taxpayers and the dollars and taking the school district dollars to put towards the city, but the city isn't reciprocating and paying us for things. So could the board really consider that before voting on this in some way, shape, or form in terms of a fee, particularly if the city is charging the school district for things? So I thought your point that you brought up, Mr. Rowland, at the last meeting was a good point, that if we're not being able as the school district to charge the city, why is the city charging us for things?
Any other public comment on this item in the room? Seeing none, is there anyone online?
We have one person online, Margaret Frisch. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Hi there, I'm Margaret Fritsch, 2404 North 88th Street. Thank you, board members, staff, and Dr. Means for the opportunity to weigh in. Perhaps this is more related to the last school board meeting, but I still want to weigh in. As a Wauwatosa taxpayer and McKinley neighborhood resident, I attended the McKinley neighborhood meeting in 2018 as it related to the referendum funds and redesign of McKinley School. In the old school gym with Phil Ertl and Dr. Jessup Anger present, I asked if elections will once again return to the school. We were told by the VJS representative and others that yes, the new McKinley School will be designed to close off the gym from the school so that the voting can return. As a candidate for alderperson representing District 6, which McKinley School is part of, a well-lit, convenient, and handicap accessible voting location is an important issue to me and residents in District 6. We are paying for the new school. And unlike the October 29th private luxury bus tour and dinner offered to an exclusive group of people paid for at taxpayers' expense, residents with adult children or no children in the district have yet to see how our tax dollars were spent on the new school. I understand you won't answer them, but I have a lot of questions for the school board to consider. Why is the school board trying to put fear in the students that police are bad or scary? Help me understand your reluctance to have a police officer on site. How many disturbances have occurred at McKinley when it was previously a voting location? I don't recall any. Every day I drive past Longfellow Middle School on my way to work and witness a Wauwatosa Police Department squad car parked in front of the school on North Avenue. Does that cause stress for the Longfellow students? If the school board deems it necessary to have a police officer at McKinley on election days, there are two options. One, use it as a teachable moment. Have the principal and or teachers talk to the students about voting and safety and the role a police officer plays in protecting Wauwatosa and keeping citizens safe. Number two, or as was a suggestion at the neighborhood meeting, hold an in-service day for staff and no students will unnecessarily be scared as some board members think they will. Also, why is there an end date to this contract of April 2023? What is the plan for after that end date? Please consider a permanent return to making our McKinley our voting district. Thank you.
There are no more hands raised.
Closes public comment on this item. Any more discussion?
I was thinking about Ms. Fritch's comments as we were designing these schools for this purpose, and I was in that room. I think she's right. And then one of the things I was happy about was the opportunity to open up these communities. And once again, want to kind of go back to thanking the community. Pretty overwhelming support for the referendum. Let's wrap up. And so I think this is a great opportunity. I would like to see us not charge the district, not charge the city for this, because I believe that this should be a collaboration. But I would like to, again, as Mr. Rollin and Mr. Clemson, explore ways how we can minimize cost to the district taxpayers for utilization of the hardware. I know we're talking about contracts tonight, but I think that would be a great conversation. There's been a lot of talk about Tosa East being able to have a graduation outdoors. And I think that would be a great collaboration between the city and the district to be able to try to open that space up to do an outdoor graduation.
Sure.
Thank you. One question, I guess, is related more to the next item, but we've already started talking about the next item, so I want to briefly ask a question. My recollection is that the hardware facilities contract was more than $45,571,000. So I'm curious if this reflects kind of the value statement that we are asking for as part of the voting sites. My recollection was that it was in the range of like 80 or 90 some thousand. So if we are getting a discount on this, then I think that gets through the conversation here of balancing. I don't know if we can find that answer tonight, but my recollection was that that contract was more in the past.
The invoice that we have is for that amount. And we have never received, we don't have a contract. So we've received an invoice. So I think that's what's made this difficult to track down as well. So I don't know if the use, but the invoice that we've received this year is for that.
So perhaps it's less. Okay. My recollection in having conversations with the city on this topic was that it was somewhere in the range of like $80,000 to $90,000 in the past. But I don't know to what extent, you know, the use then is the use now, or if that was that.
Any board comments?
Sure. May I speak?
Go ahead,
Mike
Mr.
Meyer. I think for the small number of days that these rooms are being used by the city for voting, that to charge the city, I just can't see that. And it's good marketing for our schools to have voters come into the building and see these nice facilities. So I would just leave it. I would just leave it as it is. And if experience over time tells us it becomes a financial burden, then that's why we have an end date on the contract, and we can negotiate that later. If we find out it is financially burdensome, for the renewal, we can talk about that based on our actual experience. But for now, I just think a gesture of goodwill is a good thing. And there were a lot of people offended when we stopped having polling in the school buildings. And I think this helps us come together as a community. So thank you. That's all.
I agree. I don't at this point want to have any fees. And I do appreciate some of the changes I asked for, and I appreciate that the city followed through on those. I would just draw your attention, there may be a typo, just check it out in under polling areas in item 2. It just talks about gyms are available only when there are no students. I think it should be present. And, you know, maybe just fix that in the site copy, friendly amendment.
Seeing no other comments, Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Doman?
Yeah. Next action to approve the 2022 park facilities, Dr. Jessica.
It is recommended the school board formally approve this expenditure, and I so move.
Board members.
Second.
Sorry.
Mr. Phillips, second. Go ahead, Doug.
Straight forward for you. A few weeks ago, I was asked to sign off on an invoice for this amount of $45,577.50 for reserving Hart Park. We utilize Hart Park for boys and girls tennis, boys and girls track and field and football primarily, in all the different levels of football played there. I was uncomfortable in signing or approving the invoice based on our issues in the past with policy 6320. That's why it's here before this. I don't know if it's come before you in the past, or if it's been in budget and you're aware of it, but just out of an abundance of transparency, I wanted you to be aware that there is an invoice or a request for payment from the city of Wauwatosa, from the school district for that amount. Now, there's ticket revenue that we do receive that offsets the cost to a certain extent. But this is the dollar amount. And the business office did some research, and this agreement goes all the way back to, I think, 2004, 2005, where there was a lot of discussion around partnerships with different organizations and community groups and how we could work together. And this is when this partnership between the school district and the city really became solidified. So again, Mr. Phillips, you may be absolutely right that the usage may have come down over the years. So the dollar amount may have been much higher. This is the dollar amount that's been presented to me for this discount. Thank you. That's right.
So just to confirm, Dr. Means, this is an invoice, but it's for the full year. So it's not like invoice number 1 where we get invoice number 2, which is going to make
I understand it's for the calendar year of 2022. I can double check that. That's my understanding.
I just want to make sure that we're not going to be hit with the same number.
Right.
Because I should know as well.
And this is for usage. It's for what we've already used for, not for.
My understanding is for a calendar year 2022. So whatever on the docket for this spring, but for sports wise, it would be mainly for spring and fall sports. Potentially graduation.
That was going to be my question, is that is it too late to book the hard park facilities for the East graduation? And if so, if we could do that sooner rather than later, because I know that a lot of students don't want it to be in the gym anymore, respectfully, or at West. So let's keep that in mind.
Thank you. Now,
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. What's wrong?
Thank you. Is there any risk in just tabling this until we know 100% sure? What we're voting on?
Yeah.
Then I'll move the table this until the next meeting.
Second.
I think that's right. It's wrong. I fully support that. I would, and as you have the discussion, for me to reach out to the city, that means that discuss if there's a greater partnership that we could come together here. Look at this cost in addition to using our places of polling, and what sort of agreements can we come to. It seems somewhat silly to be transferring taxpayer dollars from one end to the other.
I will check on the duration, what time period this invoice covers, and bring it back to you.
Can we slide in the graduation?
I was just gonna say.
Yes, I'll put on my negotiation.
On the side.
All right, so there's a motion and a second to table this. Any further discussion on tabling item? We're not voting on this to enact it. I think the motion to table the vote.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips? Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Dillman?
Yes. All right, moving on to school board reports. The 2021.
The reason why we're all here. I would like to bring up our auditor is here, and I really do want to thank you, Mike, for this.
You have a full school board experience.
That's for sure.
Mike Suma from Schumacher Suma is here to answer questions. I think we actually have a presentation. Who can assist with bringing up the presentation from board docs, that would be great. But we tried to take some of your questions that you presented at our last meeting to really synthesize and break down what do you need to know as it pertains to the financial health of the district from an audit perspective. And I think Mike's done a nice job in capturing that information.
So they help you out.
They're gonna help you out.
Try to get it up as well.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Am I on the right one?
No, you're down.
That's down.
Down here
Down.
and right here, right? Just go. Is that what to present it that way?
Yes, thank you.
I don't think it's in the Zoom meeting, no. I think you're gonna have to go through like this.
Okay, that works. Thank you.
Just go through it.
Okay.
So Mike, thank you again for your patience and for being here this evening. Mike's firm handled our financial audit that took place this summer. And we went over that report last meeting. And again, Roger Dixon and I met with Mike to just give a high level review of the questions that you posed to us that you felt needed to be answered from this perspective. But also, we're here to answer any questions that you may have. So, thanks.
Yep, thanks, Dr. Means. Good evening, everyone. So just for the record, my firm, Schumacher Sama, was formerly known as Feld Schumacher. So we've been the district's auditor for easily over 10 years. But just in case there was any confusion, we're not a new firm or anything. We just changed our name for this past year. So
you're a recent new partner.
And yes, now my name is, yes, thank you. Yep. So, okay, so with that, I can proceed here, maybe. So just to start out with some financial highlights, kind of taking some of the high level numbers and just a little bit of explanation at a high level on what has changed year to year. So in this slide, you see the balance sheets. So you have two different types of reports, what we call governmental funds and then what we call district-wide statements. And the governmental funds most closely correlate with what gets reported to DPI in the annual report and what you look at in your budget month to month. The district-wide statements include a number of additional things that you don't often see, including WRS pension figures, all of the actual buildings and equipment from the district. So you can kind of see side by side just the differences there. I guess I'll just focus on the changes down at the bottom. So with the governmental fund balance sheets, so here, you see a decrease in current assets of about $70 million. And you also see a decrease in total assets of about $70 million. And then you see a decrease in fund balance. And that's all kind of related to the capital projects that occurred. So there was, a lot of money expended there that was all planned out. And then debt service payments. So those are kind of the two big ticket items that contribute to that decrease. On the flip side over here, there's a similar decrease in the current assets, and that's, again, the same thing related to the capital projects and debt service. Then you see a decrease in total assets of a lot less. That's because we have these other items deferred outflows, those are all pension language from the WRS pension that has to get reported on the district's financials, and then all these equipment and things like that. So it's a little less comparable, but those are essentially the high level items that caused the change there. Go to the next slide. Now we just have a little bit of comparison of the district's income statements. So to the right is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. Again, correlates closely to the DPI reporting and budget that you prepare and look at, frequently throughout the year. So there was, again, a big change, in the fund balance, reduction in fund balance, 68 million. And that's, as we were saying before, related to all the capital expenditures and debt service payments. There was also greater expenditures in the gift fund as compared to the prior year. Then we go to the other side, statement of activities, and you have a swing here that is a little bit less obvious. On full accrual statements, you have a lot more things that go into these numbers to get to the bottom line. And then a lot of it relates again to these WRS pension figures that are required to be reported. We get those directly from the state and just have to put them into these statements. So it just makes it difficult to analyze these numbers, but it's just required by governmental auditing standards. And so those fluctuations year to year with the pension amounts are significant, millions of dollars one way or the other. And it's all just based on how they invest the funds. So it's a little less useful, I think, for operational purposes, but it's required to be reported. So then we come down to the budget highlights, kind of look at the general fund final budget versus actual. So you ended up in the budget with a deficit of 5.5 million. In the actual results, you actually had 853,000 of a deficit. So that's about a 4.7 million favorable variance. And basically, again, high level, state and federal revenues were higher than expected. And then expenditures that were budgeted for instruction were less. Does anyone have any questions so far about the kind of the summary numbers?
Can you just explain when we show a deficit, how that money's made up, just so that understands where that comes from?
Where these figures actually came from?
No, where if we're showing a deficit, does that mean we borrowed the money? Does that mean we took it out of a different fund that it rolled over from years before?
Oh, yeah. Well, it could be that you had fund. I mean, I know this district has had a large fund balance year to year. What that equates to monies that are actually invested. So you may have cut into that to some degree. I don't have the whole report here, so I could, if you need that analysis, I could do that.
No, I just wanted to, there's a deficit, we utilize our fund balance. I just wanted to explain that we weren't borrowing to cover that deficit, but that was used for our fund balance.
Sure. Yep. All right. So then we'll go on to, this is the first audit finding that we had. We had 2 audit findings that we reported on. So this audit finding is pretty typical at most school districts. Essentially, because we're hired to prepare the financial statements, we have to consider that an internal control deficiency just based on our auditing standards. It's not really a huge concern. Like I said, most districts find it more efficient to hire their auditor to prepare the statements than to try to undertake to hire a qualified individual who's going to do that for them. There's been a few exceptions to that over the years, but for the most part, most districts just find it easier to do that. And so, it's considered a deficiency. What has to happen is that the district has to review our work and approve it. And that did occur for this year. So that's, in these scenarios, that's what has to happen. If the district did not, take responsibility and approve the statements, then we would have had a problem, but that was not the case. So on this finding, it's really not too big of a concern in my opinion. Does anyone have any questions on what this means exactly or anything like that? All right, second finding.
If I could weigh in.
He's still here.
This is Roger. If I could weigh in, I would just like to assure the TOSA board that you've always had you haven't always, but for the last many years, you've had a CPA sitting in the director of finance position. And he actually prepared a set of financial statements that he uses to compare to the statements prepared by the auditors. So you are effectively getting the financial statements prepared. There may be a variance here and there, but it's you had a CPA that was looking at it. This particular year, you had me looking at it. I've trained many of the auditors in the state of Wisconsin. For many years, I was the only school district in the state of Wisconsin that would get an annual award from the Association of School Business Officials International for preparing the financial statements. So I also understood it. So I think that Mr. Samo has a note later, but it is important that a school district your size does have someone in place that does know how to prepare and or at least analyze and read financial statements. And I'm hoping that that will be continued in the future.
Okay, so to continue on, so finding number 2, and I guess just to give a brief history, of our dealings with Wauwatosa School District, the audit always went very smoothly. The people that were in charge of it, the former business director and finance manager did a really good job. We're always prepared. And unfortunately, when we arrived on the scene this year, that was not the case. There was just a lack of preparation, possibly a lack of understanding of what needed to be done. So basically the timeline of it, we kind of got there for our planned audit visit. The first week went by and we really had not accomplished much of anything. And then kind of lost contact with the person who was helping us through the audit. And I believe that's the time when I called Dr. Means and just informed him that, this is not going as it normally would go and, something's wrong here. And I think he proceeded to hire a former business manager who was able to come in and eventually close the books. But that initial situation where, there was just that lack of preparedness and, we understand that there was a staff turnover that's really difficult and it seems to always happen right around audit time. People like to leave, as the audit is starting or, right before the audit starts. It's not the best time to have to hire someone. Nonetheless, we have to look at that as a control deficiency that, things were not in order. Subsequent to this with the things that have been done, I think it's on track to get back in order, but that was the situation for this year. And at the end, as Roger mentioned, he came in to kind of review our financial statements and put the finishing touches on. So I guess to sum up, that's kind of how this year's audit went. Does anyone have any questions about this finding? All right. So just a few more, I guess, bullet points here. So Roger Dixon provided his work that he worked with Dr. Means on to, come up with a plan for how to have this situation be better and to resolve this deficiency. In my professional opinion, I think that if this plan is executed, that problem will be solved, that this would not happen again. It does, however, somewhat depend on replacing those positions that were always, in effect, so that whether they're called the business director or CFO or whatever it is, and the finance manager, but those two people really handled the audit. And so, and it sounds like you're going to be seeking those people. So hopefully next year's audit will go, smoother, back to the way it used to be. But those two positions are a key part of the internal control structure. And I just said that. So anyways, we just need to execute the plan that he came up with. I think it's good. I think it actually clarifies things, maybe even improves upon the procedures that were in place, over the years here. So it looks like it will do a good job.
Full transparency, we'll start the process of looking to hire and we're going to try to use new nomenclature with positions instead of assistant superintendents. So we'll look to hire a new chief financial and operations officer. We'll start that process this week, hopefully as soon as tomorrow. But typically, the person who's that CFO would like to hire their own director of finance. So Mr. Dixon and I have had the conversation of perhaps he's the bridge to ensure that our audit isn't in the same position that we were in this past year. So there's some continuity. So we started that discussion. So we're not in a hectic and confused state as we were this year. Because it is important to have a good closeout of your financials. The gentleman that Mike is referencing is Mark Duff that worked with us and helped us complete things. So just so you are aware of how we're looking to bridge things moving forward. Sorry.
No, that's no problem. So I think I said some of this already. And just to clarify, I guess, so in a financial audit, which is what we're doing, we do look at, we review the internal controls that are in place and we do testing of them. It is not, though, a full audit of internal controls, which would be a lot more in-depth and beyond the scope of a financial audit. But if there was sufficient concern, that's something that could be done. In some cases, if there's some concern, we have also done expanded testing. So we take the normal testing that we do and just expand upon it, to whatever degree is agreed upon, to provide some additional assurance, if there was a feeling that was necessary. And our understanding was that there's already work being done with CLA on some aspects of the internal control structure that I think will be, their findings with that will be helpful too, I'm sure. So yeah, that concludes what I had. I guess if anyone has anything else I can answer, if I haven't answered any aspect of the questions you had.
No, thank you. I appreciate you coming here. Appreciate you staying late with us. Just to highlight their last point there, that this audit is our general financial audit that's done every year. What CLA is doing is for the other issues that have been uncovered. So that's two different audits just for people who are following at home. That would also just add that, certainly I think we're probably all concerned with this second finding and what happened there. Dr. Mead was keeping me informed as those issues went on. I feel confident we can trust those issues and we'll find a great replacement and move forward. So I appreciate Dr. Mead's diligence to make sure that we completed and closed out this audit, and I'm confident that it will get us in a good place. So next year that doesn't happen. We have a great place. So I'll open up to board questions or comments.
May I have the floor, President Doman?
Ms. Fraley was going to go, and then I'll come to you, Mr.
Okay,
Meyer.
thank you. Yep.
It'll be real quick, Mr. Meyer. So you had mentioned that previously Mr. Mack had the CPA background. Are you saying that it's recommended that the highest level person has that CPA background, or is it okay that your business manager or director, I think is the language that Dr. Means used, has that? Or is it you want the person at the highest level to have that. I just want to make sure that our job descriptions are lined up, and Mike's probably already done on this too. I just want clarity for myself.
I've seen it both ways. I've seen it where the business director has had the higher level of knowledge or the specific knowledge needed to prepare these type of statements, for example. And I've seen it where it was the one step below the accountant, finance manager, they're called different things. So I guess I don't really have an opinion necessarily. Yeah, if you have one of those two who has that knowledge, you'll be fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes, first a comment on the staffing problem that we had. The last time we had a departure of the business manager was nearly 18 years ago. When the business manager departed, the head of accounting had been with the district for some years and remained with the district. And so this kind of transition where both roles were gone essentially in the same time frame, I mean, that hasn't, I don't know when that would have happened, well before my time. That would have been like a quarter century ago, literally. So this was a very unusual, rare type of staff transition. And no, we didn't handle it well. But just to put it in some historical context there was no continuity because both roles departed at the same time. And pretty much in line with the superintendent departing. So just to put that perspective on it. My question is, for our learned auditor, do you have a sense for how often it would be wise to perform a full audit of internal controls? My guess is that we wouldn't need to do that every year, but my other guess is that periodically from time to time, it's a good idea. But how often? Is every 2 years, every 5 years? What do you have a sense of that you can speak to a little bit tonight?
I think that it would sort of be dictated through your ongoing monitoring. So, if you did it initially, for example, and then a few years go by and it seems like there's still areas needed for improvement or things like that you could consider doing it again. I definitely wouldn't think you need to do it every year. That seems like that would be too much. Every 3 to 5 years, possibly, if the need seems to be there. But I think the more important thing is just in between is the monitoring. When you have all the people that need to monitor, putting their heads together and making sure things look like they're operating properly.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Any other board questions or comments?
May I ask a very general John Q. Public question? So what is the general financial health of the district? If you were just talking to someone, as our auditor, what would you say?
Well, if I recall correctly, your fund balance is at around, is it 35 million-ish?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's pretty strong. It's a big district, but I think I forget what percentage that is exactly, but it's like a healthy percentage of your expenses. So I would just say that looks like you have, a good surplus built up for things that may come up. It seems pretty fiscally, I know it's always been a focus too. I remember in the past, John Mack would always talk about the fund balance and maintaining it. So
I think the board knows, the community may know that we have a self-funded health program. So we have a larger than normal fund balance because of it, but nonetheless, even if you took that into account, our fund balance is stronger. It's one of the stronger positions in terms of fund balance in the metropolitan area. the fact that we're able to manage our health insurance costs through a self-funded model is also another strong position that we're able to manage. There's obviously school funding challenges that we face, but we're able to address those, and we've been able to manage them in a prudent way over the past few years. So generally speaking, I hear you saying based on our fund balance position and other metrics that we're in a strong position as a financial organization.
Yeah, at a high level, I would think, any district would say, yeah, we want to have that fund balance built up like that.
And to Leanne's question that she posed last meeting, which is, so what's changed between 2021 and 2022? The two high level pieces that you shared with us today is that having some cross training in our business office and hiring well is something that we should pay attention to. Not only be prepared for the audit, but just to, as Mr. Meyer referenced, be prepared for the next 18 to 20 years of leadership in business services is one of your recommendations.
Yes.
One of your main recommendations, correct?
Yeah, you need those staff in place. And, just someone that's going to continue the fiscal responsibility and maintain, good fund balance and doing all those things.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Mr. Rowe.
One thing to just add on that, just for anybody following along, the surplus allows us to not have to short-term borrow for operating. And I believe we're one of maybe the only school district in Wisconsin, what including John Magdalene, that we are one of the few or maybe the only school district that doesn't short-term borrow to just pay for our ongoing operating expenses. So it's a great financial position that we are in.
Yes.
Thank you for letting us stay there.
Any other board questions or comments on this? Seeing none here. Thank you. Appreciate you coming.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. We felt that we were going to give us an update on Wisconsin Socialist School.
Well, yes, thank you. And I will be brief. You allowed me to be your delegate at the WSD assembly. It did take the entire afternoon of Wednesday, January 19th. I was in person. The membership was down, obviously, because of COVID. I think probably one of the main reasons. We had this year, we did a hybrid meeting. So there were a majority in the room, but not that big of a majority. Many districts and CSIS participated by Zoom. In addition, we did have a non-delegate link, so there could be people observing the delegate assembly. There were some technical issues. There are always technical issues, but it was a little bit complicated by Zoom. I'm glad that they tried it, and hopefully will continue, because I think it just is helpful to see that process in action. And that process of the delegate assembly, and we had 10 resolutions that we were considering. It wasn't unlike, I guess, for the public tonight, it wasn't unlike what we did a couple of items back here in the room. It seems a little clumsy sometimes to go through the process of wording, and that's certainly what had happened on some of the resolutions, but basically all the resolutions passed. I voted in the majority on every one. There were some amendments and changes to some of the resolutions, which I, most I did not vote for the amendment, but it just depends on what's in the room. There was a lot of, I'm not sure if anyone is curious really about any, certainly a lot of heated comments and some long debates on some items. And I guess I could share with you which ones those were. But really, that was it in a nutshell. So it was, yeah, there was quite a bit of public comment on the resolution of curriculum and professional training on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. That was probably a debate that lasted like half an hour. So there's quite a bit of content there. There was some discussion on the national memberships, some amendments there, but eventually that passed. And another, I think, key resolution and one that our board wanted me to make sure that we paid close attention to was broadening staff expenditures eligible for state categorical aid for school mental health services. And what the amendment did there, which I agreed with, was basically we added school nurses to that paragraph. So, anybody interested in anything else, or that'll be a wrap.
Yeah, you know, I've been working with the Hmong community for 20 years, and it was a big win to get the AAPI, through. Do you feel like the district should, take that recommendation or start thinking about, from a curricular standpoint, some of the contributions of Asian American Pacific Islanders in our district? I don't have the numbers like what percentage of our students offhand are of Asian descent, but just wondering if you thought like that's a worthy endeavor of our district, or did you feel like it was kind of
yeah, well, I actually want to go back on another resolution after we talked about this. But yes, a lot of it is, some of it was misunderstanding of, of curriculum. And then there were some members who wanted much more in the resolutions. And so it was an interesting debate. Nothing much changed at the end. But most people want to know what is the curriculum. And there's a lot of, there's just I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this, but there's, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation out there about the kind of curriculum districts need. And a lot of districts are going down a path that their communities don't agree with. And so that further complicates it. So again, there's so many districts in the room. There's almost, there were 280 voting members present. And, as the assembly goes on, the numbers get smaller, basically. And so everyone's in a different place. You have rural, urban, suburban. It's just, I didn't actually speak at the microphone because I didn't have to. Most of the comments that I think our district made were already made by other folks, but I certainly would have if I thought I should. But it's something we should take a look at to expand our curriculum, to reach more students and, of all backgrounds, and having a welcoming environment so that they can identify. That's really what that is. So, and then the one I wanted to go back on also was the advanced learning resolution, which is also really interesting. A couple of, I think there was misinterpretation of the wording of this, but basically this was encouraging schools to focus less on identifying gifted students and more on identifying and addressing unmet learning needs. So there were a couple of amendments to this one, but basically the emphasis was on addressing unmet learning needs of students, less about actually identifying students. And so again, when the WSD is lobbying on our behalf, that's what they're gonna be processing. But it took a little bit for that to come out.
Thank you for that. Any other questions from Ms. Weaver?
Yes, Mr. Doman, may I speak?
Go ahead, Mr. Meyer.
I'm hopeful and curious, were our student board members able to attend in any capacity? I understand they might not be able to, but if they were, did they have any observations from the experience?
I was not able to attend as it was during school, although I would have loved to. Sorry.
Yeah, it's difficult, you know, it's a school day afternoon and, but as soon as I have I didn't see the final resolution document. As soon as I have that, I'll make sure that it is posted.
Thank you, Mr.
Well, I would propose a policy change to allow student board members to go on a field trip for the convention next year. Anyway, okay, thank you.
Speaking of field trip, board members, the Wauwatosa East Chamber Orchestra also performed the morning, that morning before the delegate assembly, before the state superintendent and a host of dignitaries. And I can tell you that they made the school district and the community proud. They were outstanding as usual and typical. Mr. Hayden and the team, that they were just fantastic. So you should know and you should be very proud of their performance. It was outstanding.
Wonderful. All right, we'll move on to community comment on these two school board reports. So we'll go to community comment about the audit report or about Ms. Weaver's report. Start with those in order. Seeing none, Jaden, is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
All right, we'll go on to our final agenda item, which is public comment on non-agenda items. So members of the public want to speak on any item that was not on the agenda, please come to the microphone. Seeing none, Jamie, is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Motion to adjourn. So moved. Okay. Please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Jessica Kanger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Doman?
Yes, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.